Welcome back to the Play by Play podcast. This is episode number 58, where today we will be looking back at my 2024 2025 NFL predictions. We're going to see what I got right, what I got wrong, and explain my thought process behind every single pick and reflect on how the season went for each and every single team. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, please feel free to subscribe, leave a like, and comment down below, and share with your friends. And if you haven't already, please feel free to follow us on all social medias, that being TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. All of the ads will be down below, and there will be a bar popping up right here. And a couple of notes before we begin with the video. Number one, this is going to be a very, very, very long episode. I am looking at this potentially being a 2-hour long episode. I'm going to try to not cut it as much as I can so that it can be fluid and so you guys can get this episode out quicker. So strap in, go out, grab some snacks, lay down while you're reacting to this, and just relax. Number two, future content for the podcast going forward. We are going to start fully transitioning into full NBA basketball podcasting as obviously the season comes to an end, as we only have week 18, which is this week. We have the playoffs, which will go through to February 18th. And then I will be mixing in a couple of NFL mock drafts for the upcoming draft as well. I have one coming out next week for the first 16 teams. So look out for that. But other than that, look out for NBA stuff, NBA trade deadline things as we start winding down longer into the season. Maybe we'll look into other, maybe we'll be watching film for certain games, maybe some of Bronny's G League games. Have to think of stuff there, but just for future reference for the episode. So without further ado, the commentary of the play-by-play podcast predictions starts right now. Let's go. All right, so a couple of things to note before we get into this. Number one, this is my first time watching through all of these since I did all these predictions, so I'm not even 100% sure what I really said or what my predictions were. Number two, this is my first time doing a reaction like this, so if the audio quality stinks, if something messes up, I really apologize. I'm just trying to work through this. This is my first time. And number three, this is probably the first time that I've ever really reacted to myself outside of, obviously I watched the episodes before I put them out, but this is a couple of months back, right before I left college. So we'll see how this goes. This is we're going to start in the AFC first. This is going to be the AFC West. I'm going to try to cut through the parts where I'm just introducing, but I also don't want to cut out anything important. So like I said, going to try to not cut very much and just watch all the way through. So let's get started. Going, everyone. Welcome back to the Play by Play podcast. I'm your host, Diego Gallegos. This is episode 39. A lot of huge names involved in it. And looking back at the history of this division, it has been a division that has dominated the NFL, at least dominated the AFC for really the past decade. If we look at it, obviously, you look at the Chiefs that have been in the Super Bowl for the past couple of years. They have pretty much been in nearly every single AFC championship for the last 4 or 5 years. And going back throughout the decade, you obviously had the Denver Broncos, who were pretty dominant, making the Super Bowl in both 2013 and 2015. They were pretty much it's so crazy to me looking at these teams because when you look at the Kansas City Chiefs pre Patrick Mahomes, a lot of that team was still the same from when they started showing real success with Mahomes. You had Reed, you had Kelsey. I think Tyreek Hill came just the year before Mahomes started. They changed their quarterback and they go to 4 or 5 straight Super Bowls and they win. They're now in position to win 3 straight. And for Denver, after their Super Bowl win, I mean, they still had a great defense, still had Demaryius Thomas, still had Emmanuel Sanders. I mean, they still pretty much had the remnant of their team. They still had Gary Kubiak a head coach, but yet the quarterback changes everything. So it's kind of crazy just to see how much of an impact quarterback really has. Much at the top of their game, the number 1 or number 2 seed every single year throughout the 2010s, having legendary battles with the New England Patriots. And even though neither of them were really Super Bowl contending teams, the Los Angeles Chargers, formerly the San Diego Chargers, were always a really, really solid winning team when they had Phillip Rivers.
and the formerly known Oakland Raiders, now Las Vegas Raiders, were always a very, very tough team to win against on the road. Oakland is a very
through this.
follow that up with the Los Angeles Chargers in second at 13-4.
Okay, so this is where I get the records
and likely will make the Super Bowl to represent the AFC. So let's not waste any time. Let's get into it. AFC West, way too early predictions for the 2024-2025 season. We start out with the Kansas City Chiefs at 14-3.
So the Chiefs right now are 15-1, and if they lose to Denver next week, I would have been a game off. Damn.
Follow that up with the Los Angeles Chargers in second at 13-4. I had the Oakland Raiders at 5-12 in third place, and I had the Denver Broncos tying them at 5-12 in fourth. Now, just looking at each one of these teams individually, going more in depth, we start off with the Kansas City Chiefs, who previously had an 11-6 season last year. They were ranked the 9th in total offense, 2nd in total defense, which was very surprising because for this Kansas City Chiefs team before last season, it was a team that was very, very thin when it came defensively, especially in the pass rush game. They had normally a couple of good corners, but really outside of Chris Jones, they didn't really have a great pass rushing game. And they upgraded. They had the second least touchdowns allowed. They had the second most sacks in the league. It was a defense that really carried what was a struggling Kansas City Chiefs offense compared to what we had seen previously from them. And that's simply because Patrick Mahomes just did not have the weapons at receiver. You had Rashid Rice, you had Kadarius Toney, two guys that just were not the top tier targets that he had previously.
See, and the thing that tripped me up with this was I felt that the Chiefs were in better position with Hopkins. Well, they got Hopkins later in the year, but with Worthy, with Rice, they had Marquise Brown, that the production was going to be better than it was last year. And in some ways it has. I think that the passing game has gone better for the Chiefs and the speed that they have. But this, if we're being honest, the offense at times has fallen flat still. And the defense really has had to pick up the slack, and shout out to Steve Spagnuolo. Kansas City's offense continues to disappoint a little bit. And of course, Kelsey's not getting any younger. I don't think that Marquise Brown is going to be developing as a player anymore throughout his career. Hopkins definitely isn't. So the big question for the Chiefs really is, can they find their Tyreek Hill again? Can they find their number one receiver to really pair with Mahomes? Because that's when I felt that the Chiefs were most unstoppable. When they won that Super Bowl against San Francisco in 2020, that was the best Chiefs team in my opinion, offensively. So that was really interesting. How the fact that this was a very similar team, and of course you get the addition of D-Hop later in the season, but still the offense continued to fall flat, and it was a very similar team to last year, even though they had a much better record, which some people might argue shouldn't be as high as it is, but we won't get into that right now.
And this year, I think, is going to be a lot different for them, which is the reason why I have them getting 3 more wins than last year. Because when you look at some of their key additions, they add Marquise Brown, you add Xavier Worthy. Those are 2 really big gadget players that are going to be able to make some huge plays downfield. And that's super important because Andy Reid is a very, very aggressive head coach. He loves going deep right out of the gate. He loves using Patrick Mahomes' arm. And they just did not have a reliable receiver that was going to be able to gain receptions down the field very often, that was even able to make holes in the defense going down the field like Tyreek Hill was able to. And now you have Xavier Worthy, the fastest 40-yard dash time in NFL history. Marquise Brown, a very similar speed. Rashid Rice is still on board. They still have McCole Hardman, who I still believe, as a 4th receiver, is definitely a lot more solid of a receiving core than they had previously. Isaiah Pacheco, another one of those gadget players. They just have so much quickness, so much athleticism on this team that is very impressive. And on the defensive side, they really didn't lose a lot. In the secondary, you still have Justin Reed, you still have Trent McDuffie in the secondary, which is going to make that deadly. Nick Bolton in the middle, which I think is going to be very important for them. Chris Jones, yes, he is aging, so we're going to have to see when that drop off year is going to happen for them. But it is a Super Bowl team that has pretty much reloaded. They have gained talent rather than lose talent. Really, when I look at it, they really didn't lose anybody outside of Willie Gay at linebacker. It's going to be a little bit of a blow, but I think that they can cover those holes. They have the 14th easiest schedule in the league. Some of the notable opponents include the Ravens, Bengals, Falcons. Obviously, they play the Chargers, 49ers, Bills, Browns, Texans. And a lot of
Which, by the way, they won all those games. They won all of their difficult games this year, pretty much. I think who beat them again? Was it the Bills? Trying to look back at it. Yeah, it was the Bills, but they beat the Chargers. They beat the Broncos. Luckily, they beat the Ravens at the beginning of the year, and they've done it, by the way, with being a bottom 7 team in attempted passes over 20 yards. So, which was, by the way, this team's identity back in 2020, which was the big time plays down the field, and they've pretty much siphoned that down to being a 5 to 10 short pass team offense, and they've still been successful. Which if that shows the greatness of Andy Reid or if that shows the greatness of the defense, but they've still managed, despite having a pretty moderate schedule, you could call it moderate, won the big games besides outside of one. And like I said, that there's all this luck stuff going out about the Chiefs, and I get it. You have them winning the coin toss in overtime against the Bucks. You have the blocked field goal against Denver. You have the touchdown in the back of the end zone against Baltimore. But at the end of the day, as much as that is luck, you also have to give credit to Kansas City because they took advantage of those opportunities. The block kick's on Denver. It is. If Denver holds and they're able to block one small cornerback from getting through, they win the game. Tampa Bay, whether you win or lose the coin toss at that point, that's a 50-50 chance. If you lose the coin toss, you need to stop. And Patrick Mahomes goes down and he drives the field and he ends it. So as much as there was some luck involved, they've still had control of their own destiny, and they have took advantage of the opportunities presented to them. But it's just so interesting how the team has changed over time, and they've kind of lost the identity that they had in the first place, but they're still successful.
those teams are right out of the gate, the first 4 or 5 games. So it is going to be a little bit tough for them early on. I think that they're going to have struggles just because they are going to be playing some solid defenses. And I think that this offense, being a little bit newer than it was the previous year, is going to have to, get on the same page, going to have to build that chemistry that they don't have. So I think against teams like Baltimore, against teams like possibly San Francisco, you have Cleveland, against those tough defenses early on, I think it's going to be a little bit difficult for them. But I think that they will be able to pull through in a lot of these close games. I don't think that the Falcons are going to be able to touch them with the defensive holes that they have. I think that the Chargers, while I think that they got a lot more talented, while I definitely like their coaching choices, and we'll get to them in a second, I prefer Kansas City's offense way more over them. I prefer their passing game way more over them, the weapons that they have.
Which, by the way, was the difference. Like, if you look at both games against the Chargers, 17-10, 19-17, they're low-scoring games. Kansas City had more talent offensively, and that's why they won the game. Because both of them have pretty solid defenses. You could argue that LA's is a little bit better, just as far as personnel and name-wise. But the offense was what was the difference against the Chargers. And you could argue if the Chargers had a Chiefs-like offense, that they could have won, the upwards of 13, 14 games this year.
The Bengals, very, very similar. Obviously, Joe Burrow has been able to find holes into beating the Kansas City Chiefs, but I think that with their defense is going to be a lot more difficult for Cincinnati. 49ers might edge them in the regular season. They seem to be just perform on a much higher level in the regular season, so could see edge them. But Browns, Texans, such like that, these are just teams that Kansas City has more experience over. It is a team that I think has a lot more offense capability than those teams. And I think for the most part over their division, they're going to dominate. I think that they sweep Oakland. I think that Denver, even though they lost once to Denver, they were dominating Denver before that. And with Denver's downgrades at some of their positions, especially at the quarterback position, I think they're going to start dominating them again. I think they sweep.
Sorry,
As far
but
as the
didn't mean
Chargers,
to
I could
disrespect
definitely
you.
see them splitting with them, maybe a home away type thing where the Chiefs win at home, the Chargers win at home. But other than
Chiefs
that,
won
the
both.
Chiefs should have a very, very easy time getting through, dominating this division, and seeing themselves at the top of the AFC once again.
Which they did, by
Which
the way.
brings us
If they
to the
beat Denver on
LA Chargers, who
Sundays, 6-0.
had a very huge increase on my board from last year. Obviously, they went 5-12 last year. It was not a great year for them last year.
So I'm sorry that I'm pausing a lot, but the Chargers were the biggest wild card out of all of this, I would say. There was a lot of people going back and forth on, are they going to be successful? Is it going to be one down year because of the offense, the low offensive ceiling that they have? Because I mean, outside of Lad McConkey and J.K. Dobbins, which by the way, both of those guys did get hurt within the season. What is there really to the Chargers offense? But I think what we underestimated, and what I did not underestimate, but what others underestimated, was the power of a great offensive line and the power of good coaching. And the fact that when you have two franchise tackles in both Alt and Slater, you add in Greg Roman, you add in Harbaugh, who, let's just be real, is probably one of the head coaches that you would specifically want for your quarterback. Somebody that is just very high energy, confident, motivating, believes in you, is willing to have a conversation on what you want to do rather than just being the boss about things. Whether it's Alex Smith, Colin Kaepernick, whether it's JJ McCarthy, who all three of those quarterbacks, by the way, weren't great talents. Smith was okay. Kaepernick wasn't really anything. McCarthy, I still believe, is not anything. Justin Herbert is a way better talent, but he never had a coach to really believe in him and lead him. And Harbaugh is that guy. And you've seen him being able to elevate mediocre quarterbacks, and now you give him a great quarterback. What did you think was going to happen? The defense was solid as well. So, and I think that's going to be a trend that was a trend throughout this whole season, is just at times we underestimated and at times we overestimated the impact of having a good head coach and a good offensive line. It matters. And even though they didn't have a lot of weapons, they were still able to get a winning season, successful. They're still in the playoffs. And once they add a big time weapon, like when you don't have Quentin Johnson dropping every single pass, when you have Lad McConkey as your number one wide receiver and next to a solid number two, when you have a tight end in your repertoire, look out for this team. They're going to be dangerous. And I wouldn't doubt if Harbaugh brings them a Super Bowl within the next 2 to 3 years if they draft right or they sign the right guy.
And when you look at who some of their key losses from, you may believe that it's not going to be another great year for them going forward again. I mean, they've lost a lot of offensive weapons. You lose Keenan Allen, you lose Mike Williams, you lose Austin Eckler. It was a team that was already 18th in total offense. They were a pretty below average team when it came to the offensive side, 13th in the passing game. They were in the top half of the passing game, but you have to assume losing so many receiving options for Justin Herbert that passing game is going to fall off. But we do have to remember that they now have Harbaugh. They now have a much more qualified head coach than Brandon Staley. I never agreed with many of the decisions that Staley did. I thought that he was weak. I thought that while he was a defensive coach, the defense was never the strong point of the team, and it shows them being the 28th total defensive team, the 30th.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Staley didn't know what he was doing. And playing his version of zone defense, it never was going to work. And Harbaugh,
worse passing,
much more intensity
in
on
the
the
NFL.
defensive
Brandon
side.
Staley was not helping the defense at all. And while the Chargers did lose a lot of offensive weapons, I think that they also gained a lot of offensive weapons in places that may not be looked at as much for Justin Herbert. They obviously had a huge number one overall pick with 5th overall pick in Joe Alt. That now gives them 2 potential all-pro tackles. You move Rashawn Slater over to right tackle. You plug Joe Alt into that left tackle. You now have likely the best young outside offensive line game in the league. They added Lad McConkey out of Georgia. It was a stacked receiver class. I had McConkey going in the second round as well, just because I felt that the receiver class was so stacked. He ends up going to LA, and while
Which
he
he
might
could have been
not
a
be
first rounder
a
if
number one
it
receiver
wasn't
type
deep.
guy, just because he has had to deal with injury problems, I'm not sure at his size what his ability is going to be on the outside. He's going to be an incredible slot receiver.
He's
He
been good.
is an incredible route runner. He's somebody that reminds me of who Jerry Jeudy was coming out of the 2020 draft, where he just had elite speed, elite route running. It's going to be somebody that is going to
I've as the season's gone on, I've felt like I've compared McConkey more to like a Julian Edelman with speed, like somebody that can just get behind the defense, get into the holes of the defense, find those holes in those areas, get passes. But with his speed, he can obviously create more yards after catch. Um, he sometimes can break routes quicker and get to holes quicker than Edelman did. So the intelligence and the athleticism is just
be able to sneak behind
it's
the
fantastic.
defense and give Justin Herbert a target going down the field. They also added Junior Colson to their linebacking core, which was a huge, huge hole for them this past season. They've added Denzel Perryman in the linebacker role as well. So now you have a core of Khalil Mack, Perryman, and Junior Colson, who, by the way, led Michigan in tackles this previous season. So it's going to be a team that is going to be a lot better at tackling. I still do not like their secondary very much. Really, the only notable guy is Derwin James in there, so that is a huge hole. But I think with them keeping Joey Bosa, with them bringing in Junior Colson, with that linebacker core being solidified once again, I think the defense is going to have a lot better time at pressuring the quarterback. They're going to make it a lot more difficult in the passing game for opposing quarterbacks. Like I said, you add all pro tackles. You have some solid receivers. You add McConkey. I think that Quentin Johnson is due for a breakout season, although he has had some struggles with dropping the ball. I think that he is there. And I mean, they have some suitable running backs. Obviously, they're not all-star level running backs, but Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, they are both guys that could make electric plays at times. Gus Edwards, much more of a power back. J.K. Dobbins is going to be able to pass catch out of the backfield. And with them having these all-pro tackles, you could see them having a running attack to the outside. I think it's a team that, just looking at names, may not have the most prestigious names, but with Justin Herbert's talent, with Harbaugh's coaching experience, with the protection that he's going to have, I think that this is going to be a team that is going to be at the top of the AFC. They have the fifth easiest schedule in the league, so it is definitely very manageable for them to go out and win games. Really, the only notable opponents that they have is the opponents that they're facing in the AFC North. They have Browns, Bengals, Ravens, and Steelers. I can see them going over the Steelers and Browns. I think Bengals and Ravens.
Which, by the way, they've dropped games. They've dropped some really heartfelt games. You look at the Cardinals game where they lost by 2. I'm looking at it right now. You have the Bucks game where they got just completely dismantled. And I know they've been dealing with a little bit of injuries, but I mean, just those 2 games alone, if they win that, they're at 12 games. Who else they dropped to? They dropped the early one to the Steelers. So there have been some easy games for LA to win this season, and they haven't. And I think that's why we don't view them as top in the AFC yet, and we see them as maybe a dark horse in the playoffs, but not a team that is realistically going to contend for a title this year because they do have some dry spells. They do have some low points.
With their offensive capabilities, could be a little bit tougher. But again, they also face Atlanta. Atlanta has a horrible defense. Could see them go. As far as the roster goes, I'm not sure how much he really has to work with. We talked about those right plays, the struggle bus to the strugglers in the division. That is the Oakland Raiders and the Denver Broncos. Going to start off with Oakland. Was a team that had a huge resurgence at the end of the year, and they're a team that I have my eye on just to see what the energy is like in the locker room, because you're now going to have Antonio Pierce in that locker room for a full entire season. It was clear that the players much preferred him to McDaniels. It was clear that he brought in really just a breath of fresh air. It seemed like players were much more happy with them. Max Crosby spoke out dozens of times on how much better the locker room energy was. So we're going to have to see how successful Pierce is.
And unfortunately, that's all he was. That's all Pierce is. Unfortunately, I think he's a great locker room guy. I think that he's motivating and he connects with the players really well, but he's disappointed me when it comes to his game management, some of his play calls. And the Raiders, by the way, I know that I predicted them to have a bad season, and they have had a bad season, but they have been really plagued by injuries. Christian Wilkins has only played 5 games for them this year. Crosby's missed some time. That defense has been torn apart. They've had multiple injuries on the offensive line. Minshew got hurt. Obviously, they traded Devontae Adams midseason, which I don't think was the plan. Obviously, so they have been plagued a little bit. But Pierce, he has great intensity, but at some point you need to have strategy, and on I think somebody like a Mike Vrabel, who is still defensively sound, is somebody that is still pretty young and can connect with players. I think that would be a little bit better of a fit than Pierce, but he's disappointing me, and I think that with the Raiders' temper as an organization, he should be worried about his job this year. Unfortunately,
Is going to be. As far as the roster goes, I'm not sure how much he really has to work with. We talked about those right places with the Los Angeles Chargers. I'm not sure what he has to work with in the right places with this Raiders team. Because when you look at some of the additions that they have, I think that they had great additions. You have Christian Wilkins plugging into the interior of that defensive line. It was definitely a huge weak point for them. They improve on the 12th best passing defense, and I think having a much better pass rush than they did the previous year is going to upgrade that even more. You add Gardner Minshew, who is a veteran quarterback who I think is going to be solid, not great, but solid. We're going to have to see how that quarterback battle
wasn't even solid. Wasn't solid. In fact, I think O'Connell had better moments this year, especially at the end of the season. The game that they had last week, Minshew, he's on his way out too. I didn't enjoy his play this year.
You add the dual tight end threat. You got Harrison Bryant. You add in Brock Bowers, who can obviously be a hybrid on the outside in the wide receiver position, which makes a deadly
Bowers exceeded my expectations
receiver
He was
duo in Brock Bowers and Devontae Adams for whoever
he looked better than Kyle Pitts' rookie year, to be honest.
They added Jackson Powers Johnson, which I thought was a huge pickup at 43rd overall, was a huge steal at 43rd overall. I had Jackson Powers Johnson going late in the first round. They get him early to mid-second.
It's been an up and down
interior
year for JPJ,
offensive line was a huge,
I think moving him to guard
wasn't
a great idea, but now that he's back at center.
They added Andre James at center. And because they had lost Van Roten at guard, that was going to have to be a big one, but now they have the replacement. So now you have a very solid offensive line. You do not have the big names, the big players that the Chargers have, but you do have a very solid offensive line. You have Devontae Adams. You have Jacoby Myers, who had some bright points throughout last year's season. You add Brock Bowers. You have Michael Mayer, Harrison Bryant. So we're going to have to see how they really deal with the huge amount of tight end depth that they have over there. But what I'm obviously interested is this running attack, what they do at the running back position. Current starter is Zamir White. They have Alexander Madison backing him up, who had a couple of bright spots in Minnesota, but they lost Josh Jacobs. They lost a very electric playmaker. And we have seen in the past, when your running game is not working, it is devastating to your passing attack. Your offensive game
makes your offense
very one-sided, very predictable, and
I think that the Raiders really need to consider. And I'm going to pause it real quick. The Raiders really need to consider, if they're not in position to take a quarterback this year. I know that there are other wide receiver options. I know that they do not have a main wide receiver right now. Scoring wide receiver could be helpful, but they need to really consider looking at Ashton Jeanty in that top 10. Because they need some dynamic running. You have
guys such as Devontae Adams, who is basically getting double covered nearly every single game. They're going to have to find a way to open up the running game if they want to be successful offensively.
Skip through this a little
but
bit more.
With Antonio Pierce being a defensive head coach, I'm not sure if he's going to have the ability to really do that. We're going to have to see how he really adjusts his schemes here. because he has the weapons. He has three tight ends. He has two solid wide receivers. He has a solid interior offensive line. He has the weapons to make this work. Sure, the quarterback is not the brightest of spots, but you have suitable guys. You don't have great guys, but you have average to above average guys in Minshew and O'Connell who could make things happen. Who, if you just dumb things down, get short routes, 5 to 10 yard slat routes, in routes, you just make.
Which in hindsight doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And I understand what I'm trying to say here, but if there's one thing that Sean Payton's offense has taught me with Denver is you cannot just throw the ball 5 yards every single play. It just doesn't. At some point, there's too much of a restriction on it. You have to start extending the ball down the field, and Oakland couldn't do it with their quarterback talent. So, yeah, it's difficult to run that type of screen type
simplified
offense every single play.
You could open up the field for them. You have the weapons. You have guys that are going to be able to gain bonus yardage for you off of these short routes. As far as the defense goes, like I mentioned, the pass rush is incredible. Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, Devon Diablo at outside linebacker. They have some great pass rushers in this lineup. Now, I'm not sure about the secondary when it comes to the secondary about this, just simply because of the depth that they have. I mean, they have Nate Dobbs at 2 cornerback positions right now on ESPN's depth chart online. So I'm not sure how huge their depth is going to be. Jack Jones on the opposite side.
It wasn't great. They got injured. I'm not trying to miss anything. I don't want to make this video too long, so I am going to be skipping
They
a couple
had
of parts.
previously gone 8 and 9. If you did not know,
Just so we can
I'm
make
a
this
Denver
about
Broncos fan.
2 hours.
Some of the key
Hopefully.
additions for them include Brandon Jones. You had Bo Nix, Zach Wilson, both 2 quarterbacks. And I think that Denver had a solid draft, especially following the pick of Bo Nix. They drafted Jonah Ellis, who was a great pass rusher. And you add Bo Nix's right-hand man in Oregon in Troy Franklin. But I believe that
the amount of times that Bo Nix and Troy Franklin have just blown plays because they can't get on the same page, or Bo overthrows them or Franklin drops it. I haven't understood why those two cannot get in sync with each other after playing so long. It's been so frustrating, and they've had so many big time plays to convert on.
Absolutely devastating. You obviously lose Russell Wilson. You're having to pay Russell Wilson's salary. Because you're paying Russell Wilson's salary, they had to let go of Justin Simmons, all-pro safety, one of the best safeties in the league. They lost Lloyd Cushenberry in the middle, one of the interior offensive linemen that was holding it down for him. He was very solid. And then you traded away Jerry Jeudy. Now, as far as Jerry Jeudy goes, the train had pretty much run out of track, right? There wasn't really that much going on. It was clear that Denver hadn't developed him, that he was not the player, the route runner that they believed he was going to be. So they got off of him. It was pretty much 4 lackluster years full of injury, full of disappointment. So they traded him to Cleveland. But it was a team that was 26 total offense. It was a team that was 24th passing offense. It was a team that was 29th ranked defense, 22nd passing defense. You lost big holes in your passing offense. You lost big holes in your passing defense with Justin Simmons. Now, don't get me wrong. Really like the signing of Brandon Jones. Solid veteran, very great in run support, is a very, very solid veteran safety that is going to be able to wrap up and tackle, which has been a weakness of Denver in the past, is their ability to tackle. But I think that the losses have really outweighed the additions.
And what's crazy about this is, now, number one, Brandon Jones has been fantastic. I actually think that in some areas of his game, he's been a lot better than Justin Simmons. Like I mentioned, the tackling, the ability to force fumbles, his coverage on tight ends is really solid. So he's been good. As far as the offense goes, when you look at the numbers and you look at the rankings, this Denver offense is pretty much the same from last year. I mean, you look at it here, 26 in total offense, 24th in passing offense. Overall, Denver's offense is pretty much in the 20s, maybe late teens at this point. I haven't looked at the numbers, but as far as I know, they're in about the 20s. And yet they have had more success, and you wonder why. And to me, it's just the ability to score. Um, they're one of the more they're one of the better red zone teams, better scoring offenses within the league. And I think that that was just an issue with Russell Wilson was the ability to finish when in the red zone, the ability to get passes down the field. Bo can do that. And sure, he's made mistakes and he's overthrown people, but he has the ability to get the ball there and put his players in a position to make a play. Whereas Russell, at some point, he didn't have the arm. He wasn't looking down the field, and it just became flat. So while the offenses are very similar, the Denver offense this year, despite having a running back room that is going purely by committee and doesn't have a main player, they're much more dynamic, much more explosive plays. You're getting people involved, such as Marvin Mims in the screen department. It looks a lot better than it did a year ago, despite the numbers being
When you
similar.
look at the fact that you're likely to have Bo Nix starting at the beginning of the season, sure, he's going to be running Sean Payton's offense to a T, but I'm not sure. While I am confident actually in some of the weapons that he has, I actually think that Denver's offense is solid. I don't think that they're going to have a great offense. Don't think that they're going to have an awful one because you still have your number one receiver in Cortland Sutton. I think that Marvin Mims Jr. is going to have an absolute breakout season for them. He's going to get more targets. His speed is going to allow him to get much more
Which he
yards
has.
after the catch.
He hasn't gotten a
You
whole
add Troy
ton of
Franklin, who I think
yardage,
is going to be a very, very big bright spot
but I
if he
think
can
this
get
is
some
still a
playing
breakout
time.
year for Marvin
And
Mims,
Denver
which I
also
love.
had some very solid receivers that emerged at the end of the season. You had Lil Jordan Humphrey and you had Brandon Johnson, who both played great alongside Jared Stidham, that elevated Jared
Johnson,
Stidham.
I don't
I
believe is
think
with the
that
team
Adam Trotman
anymore.
and Greg
Humphrey
Dulcich, again, they're not huge
drops
names,
too many
but
balls. Bailey
Trotman
Jones
played
has been a
very
pleasant
solid
surprise.
throughout the length of the season. It comes down to the offensive line. It comes down to the protection. And when you look at the fact that Bo Nix was one of the least sacked quarterbacks in college football the previous year, I'm just not confident enough in this offensive line. You now have Sam Mustafir in the middle of that at center. I think that Lloyd Cushenberry is tiers above him. Ben Powers, he was one of the weak points in the.
So, in hindsight, this is wrong because Denver's offensive line has been probably the best in the league. They've definitely been the best pass protecting offensive line in the league. And Ben Powers has surprised the crap out of me. Garrett Bowles, too. He has not made his main mistakes, and he is really coming around as the left tackle despite him being 31, 32 years old. McGlinchey hasn't had as many issues last year in the pass protection game. Miners is a beast. Center hasn't been a hole. It's overall been one of the better offensive lines in the league. So that's been a
in the entire offensive line
pleasant
last
surprise
season.
for Denver this
Mike
year.
McGlinchey has still not improved as a pass what's the word? A pass blocker. I apologize. Is an incredible run blocker, but a terrible pass blocker.
Okay, so here's the AFC South video. I skipped through a little bit, but basically was just talking about the South's history, how they've been one of the least impressive divisions in the league, which is true. Gosh, I need a haircut, but now we get into the predictions for this one. So let's go.
Of the AFC. So AFC South way too early 2024-2025 season predictions. I have the Houston Texans coming in first place at 13-4. I have the Indianapolis Colts at 6-11 coming in second. The Jacksonville Jaguars tie the Indianapolis Colts in third at 6-11. And then I have the Tennessee Titans coming in last place at 5-11. So
interesting. So I sort of got it right when it came down to having all these teams bundled up together, but I had the records wrong. Texans I way overrated. Colts I underrated, and then the Jags and Titans I overrated a little bit, but both of them weren't going to be.
let's
Weren't gonna be
start
great.
with the Houston Texans, a team that is going to be one of the surefire picks to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl this year. I fully believe. Last year they went 10-6. This year I have them taking a little bit more of a jump, taking about 3 wins more at 13-4. Now, this is going to be a little bit difficult for them to accomplish because when you look at their schedule, they actually have the 26th easiest schedule in the league. They have a top
They had a really
6
tough schedule this
hardest
year,
schedule
but
in this league. And when you look at
they've
it,
also been
it is a
super disappointing.
bloodbath, especially early on. You have the Chicago Bears, the Buffalo Bills, the Green Bay Packers. You then move into the midpoint of the season where you have the New York Jets, the Detroit
Who,
Lions
by
that
the way,
face off against the Dallas
they beat
Cowboys, the
both the
Miami
Bears
Dolphins,
and the Bills,
rematch the Kansas City Chiefs,
and they beat
rematch the Baltimore Ravens. There are a lot of
once at least.
top-heavy
But they lost to the
teams
Jets. They lost
in
to
this
the
schedule.
Lions.
But
They
I
lost to the
think that
Titans.
with
They
some
just
of the moves
they
that they have
dropped a
made,
lot of
this can make them very
games that they
competitive
should have
and
won.
push them over the edge to win against so many of these tough teams. We've seen them. They traded for Stephon Diggs from the Buffalo Bills. They were able to trade Joe Mixon for a 6th-round pick from the Cincinnati Bengals, who, if he can stay healthy, will bolster a running attack that was pretty subpar last year and was one of the reasons why down the stretch they got stopped by top-heavy defenses such as the Baltimore Ravens. They actually had the 22nd rushing offense in the league. They did have the 7th best passing offense. And so adding in Joe Mixon, who's going to
And they were fine. That's the thing that was so amazing for me is Mixon was doing so great at the beginning of the season. I believe he got an injury midway through the season, if I'm not mistaken. He had like an ankle injury or something, but they have just completely cooled off down the stretch of this
be
season,
able
and even
to
against poor
bolster that
defenses
running
too.
game. Adding in Stephon Diggs, D'Amico Ryans
Mm.
can now play a game in cat and mouse where he's going to have to balance these two, and it's going to make them a little bit more unpredictable. It's going to make their attack more unpredictable, which is going to make them hard to scheme against and is going to not allow teams to focus on sole players. You still have Tank Dell, you still have Nico Collins, you still have Dalton Schultz at tight end, who had a great solid season as their starting tight end for them. This offense is going to be able to fire on all cylinders. Now, the point that you're going to have to focus on for them is defensively, something that I never thought that I would say about a D'Amico Ryans team, because it was a team that was 23rd in passing defense last year. It is a team that lacks depth when it comes to the cornerback position. And they were able to pick up, I believe it was their 3rd-round pick in Kamari Lassiter at defensive back. But when you look at the state of this roster, it still is not very pretty.
And they've been better. That's the thing, is the defense has overperformed and the offense has severely underperformed. CJ Stroud has had a complete 180 of a sophomore season, but the defense, they rank top 10 in passing, rushing defenses. They've been solid in getting stops, but the offense has been able to produce. And I know they've also been dealing with injuries. Tank Dell just got hurt. I believe Collins got hurt middle of the season. Diggs got hurt for a couple of games. Mixon got hurt. So I get that, but
when it comes to their secondary. And
it's
it's
very
something that they're
disappointing
going
from
to
an
focus
offensive
on.
standpoint.
It's something that I think that we should look at for them as far as the trade deadline comes in. They picked up Jeff Okudah from the Detroit Lions, but he has been injury prone in his career, has not turned out. Jimmy Ward on the older side of the veteran side. Derek Stingley Jr. has been solid. So you have a lot of solid players. Desmond King, the second, plug in at nickelback. There are a lot of solid players at corner, but not really that number 1 overall corner. Now, what they are lacking in the secondary, they are doing pretty solidly in the front 7 when it comes to pressuring the football. They added Danielle Hunter this season, which is a big addition to sit across from Will Anderson Jr. The problem for them is going to be in the middle
passing
of that
defense has been
line.
better than the rushing
at that
defense.
Nose tackle, they were able to get Nico Autry from the Tennessee Titans, I believe. So hopefully he can be somebody that can plug the middle, but he is very below average. But still, Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson Jr., Christian Harris, Aziz Al-Sher, this is going to be a bolstered pass rush who is going to need to get to the quarterback quickly, especially when you're facing very great quarterbacks such as Lamar Jackson. You're going to need to contain.
Skip forward a little
really
bit.
Huge. In fact, they really only gained from their draft. Now, what I did not like about their draft, I think they got a lot of talented players. I think they got some steals. Laitu Leitao was likely my top pass rusher. He slid down a couple of boards just due to some injury concerns. Adonai Mitchell had some attitude concerns, but I think was an absolute steal in the 2nd round and is going to bolster a passing attack that now includes Michael Pittman,
no touchdowns.
who I think has established
I'm looking right now over 300 yards.
A very great receiver in this league. What I do not like about Indianapolis's approach is just like Houston, they did not improve their secondary whatsoever. You had a lot of great cornerbacks in this draft. Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, you have Kool-Aid McKinstry, who fell to the 2nd round. They had opportunities to improve this secondary, and they just didn't.
Yeah, defense is
And
terrible.
it was a secondary
They have solid
that
safety depth,
was
but
they
they've
were
gotten hurt
24th
too.
in total defense. They were 16th in passing
It's proved
defense.
costly
They were
for them.
24th. They were 24th in rushing defense, despite having a very solid pass rush. Despite adding Latu Leitao to a very solid pass rush, that includes. Sorry, I'm going to the depth chart real quick just so I can see all the players. Nobody that I really like at nickelback. So it's another situation that we look at for them with Houston, where the pass rush is going to need to get there. Now, the problem that they have opposed from Houston is they have a little bit of a quarterback problem. Anthony Richardson is talented. There is nothing to say about him. But only playing, I believe he only played 4 games last season, having injury concerns, who I would compare to somebody that we've seen, such as Robert Griffin III, with his mobility. It is really concerning. And it was an offense that really, really missed that push from Anthony Richardson.
And Richardson's been disappointing in his play. Anyways, I think that this has been his true rookie year as a quarterback in terms of learning, because obviously he's played way more games than he did last year, and he's not looked great whatsoever. There have been some big time air balls, overthrows, bad interceptions. He has still gotten hurt despite playing more games. The offense just fall flat. And that's why what's so interesting is the Colts still had like a decent season. Like they're still in position to go 8-9. And I think that's because they've just somehow dogged games out. I can't even explain it because the defense is so terrible, because Richardson has been so up and down. He's been very disappointing. And because of that, Pittman suffered. I think his stock has dropped a lot. They've had to lean on guys such as Pierce. Adonai Mitchell has been terrible. So they've dogged
It's
it
an
out. It's
offense
been
that,
super
like I
interesting.
said, is very talented. Having Michael Pittman Jr., you add Adonai Mitchell, you have Jonathan Taylor, one of the top running backs in the league. Let's see here. Alec Pierce, who I think is a very underrated wide receiver in the league. But Richardson is going to need to stay healthy, because it was a team that, despite having one of the best running backs in the league, despite having top targets, was 20th in passing offense and 25th in passing touchdowns and 23rd in red zone offense, because just like we spoke on with Houston being predictable when it came to their passing game, Indianapolis relied too much on their running game. And when it came to the red zone, so many people were just able to stop them because they were not
And they've
concerned at
tried to
all
open it
when it
up
came
more
to the
this
quarterback
year, but again,
position with Gardner
Richardson
Minshew
hurted them.
being able to throw touchdowns. So we've seen success from Anthony Richardson in the red zone. We've seen his ability to throw touchdowns in the red zone. He's going to need to stay healthy, because if he can, I think that this is a Colts team that could win more than what I have here at 6-11.
Colts ranked
They have the
26th in
7th easiest schedule in the league,
passing
guys.
offense, by the way.
Notable opponents are
Don't
only
even
the
average
Packers,
200
Bears,
passing yards
Dolphins,
a game.
Lions, and Steelers. And then,
But
of
then
course,
rushing
the Texans
offense,
that
they're
they
top
face
10.
in.
So
They do not have a hard schedule at all. It is all going to be on the shoulders. Pressure is going to be
scored
on the
the same amount
shoulders
of rushing
of
and
Anthony Richardson
passing
to stay healthy.
touchdowns
Because if he can,
this
I
year.
think that this is a
So
team
you
that
could
could
call
be
that
in a
balance,
low
but
playoff role right behind Houston. If he can't, they're going to have another disappointing season like they did last year at 9-8, and that would really, really be hard to watch with a team that I think has so many underrated names offensively. So somehow get worse. And again, it leads to the quarterback situation. Trevor Lawrence did not have a good season at all last year. 21 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. He took a humongous step back with a team that bolstered their offense last year, just like we saw this year. They got Calvin Ridley for him. They got him a number 1 receiver. He's not going to have Calvin Ridley this year. And while they have gotten Gabe Davis, while they got Brian Thomas
by the
Jr.,
way, he's
while they
throwing at
still
the
have
same
Christian
rate.
Kirk, they still
11
have Evan
touchdowns,
Ingram.
7 interceptions this year.
To me, they're all really good players,
He's
but
just
there's
been
nobody
very
like a
turnover
Calvin
happy.
Ridley who can serve in as
Rating
that number 1
is
option
lower,
on this
which
team.
I know he's played less games, but
And I
rating
think
is
that's an
lower.
issue, because it was a team that struggled
Passing
in the
percentage is
running
lower.
game, had the
Same amount of
24th
passing yards.
rushing
Like he
offense
hasn't
this
improved.
past season. I
He has
don't see
not
ETN
improved.
getting better. I think he is a lot more effective when it comes to being a pass catching running back. He is not really great at making a move in the backfield, making a man miss, and being able to get 5, 6, 7 plus yards out of his rush. He's much more of a passing. The passing offense is fine as long as Trevor Lawrence performs. But again, it's another very single led offense. It's going to be another predictable offense where despite the additions that they've made, there's not really a lot of huge names. We just mentioned with Indianapolis, you have Jonathan Taylor, one of the top running backs in the league. You have Michael Pittman, one of the most underrated wide receivers in the league and somebody who has shown his worth. Christian Kirk is not a number one wide receiver for Jacksonville. Brian Thomas Jr., while I think he could grow into that, is not going to be that.
That's why if they're in position to take Travis Hunter, they need to take Travis Hunter. If Hunter wants to play wide receiver,
as the second,
or maybe look
third,
for somebody like Teddy
McMillan,
McMillan,
receiver on that.
They
Buffalo
need
offense.
a wide
so
receiver.
You have some guys that can stretch the field, but you're not
corner
going to have somebody
big
who is going to
for
be
them. Offensive
consistent
line
for Trevor Lawrence, who's going to be a consistent
because
target,
Lawrence is
who is
continuing
going
to get
form
pressured every single game.
a duo for him, as we have seen
they
out
need
of
to
the great
find a
quarterbacks
number
in
one
NFL history.
receiver option,
And that's a problem. And it's tough for me to say because the offensive line is pretty solid. You, like I said, they had Eric Armstead. You get Brandon Scherf. You get Mitch Morse. Cam Robinson, while he has struggled a little bit, has improved a little bit. It's a solid offensive line. But the production isn't there from Trevor Lawrence. The offense from a weapon standpoint has gotten younger, has not improved. While they've improved in depth, they have not improved in talent. Defensively, you add Ronald Darby to, once again, what is a very, very lack of depth secondary. You have Tyson Campbell across from him. He's solid, but there's really nobody in that nickelback role. Right now, ESPN has Darnell Savage in that position. Don't think that he's really going to play there. I could see him playing more of a safety role because their safeties, not really much talent there. You have Antonio Johnson, Andre Cisco there, not much that I really like. The linebackers are okay. Forsett Oluokun, who led the Falcons in tackles just a couple of years ago. Devin Lloyd at inside linebacker is solid. But again, you don't have a lot of solid names. Did I say that Eric Armstead was on the offensive line? I'm so sorry. I was thinking about Teron Armstead. Eric Armstead defensively having the pass rush.
Terrible.
So I like certain guys on this Jacksonville team. I like Trayvon Walker. I like Eric Armstead. I like Devin Lloyd.
As I skip through this, Trayvon Walker has been just such a big disappointment, guys. That is why you choose talent sometimes over just raw athleticism, because
leads to the final team of the day, the Tennessee Titans, who once again are taking a step back. 6-11 last year, they're 5-11 this year. And again, when you look at it, there's more additions than losses. They added Chidobe Awuzie to be their number one cornerback. Has dealt with a little bit of injury, but I think he's been okay. Lloyd Cushenberry, very solid center for Denver for the past couple of years. Tony Pollard, great in Dallas. Calvin Ridley, like we just mentioned, Jacksonville, was Trevor Lawrence's main guy. J.T. Latham, one of the top tackles, thought they should have gone for Talise Fuego, thought that he was a better all-around guard, but I think Latham is definitely going to develop very well. T'Vondre Swift to bolster what is already a pretty solid passing attack. What is holding this Tennessee Titans team back? Well, number one, they have the 27th easiest schedule in the league. One of the toughest schedules in the league. Bears, Jets, Packers, Dolphins.
Well, what's held them back is Will Levis. Like, let's be honest, the quarterback position is what held them back. And yes, the offensive line was awful this year. First year head coach, I get that. But Calvin Ridley, Tony Pollard, you had Hopkins for bulk of the season. They have Okonkwo. I believe they have Okonkwo at tight end. Like, they have weapons. The defense is okay, but the offensive line combined with Will Levis is just, it's terrible. And this is, Colin Cowherd says this all the time on Fox, where he says the most important thing to a football team that you need is a good head coach, a quarterback, a solid pass rusher, and a franchise tackle. Those are the four keys. And Latham was really disappointing. Levis was disappointing. Callahan's a first-time head coach. Do they have like a big-time pass rusher this year? So when you're lacking in those
Chargers,
it's going to go
Bengals in there. They have to face the Houston Texans. If the Jags' offense is able to get going, they're going to have to face the Jags. Indianapolis, if their offense is able to get going, they're going to have to face Indianapolis. They have a very, very tough schedule, and they don't have an offensive line. The offensive line is absolutely abysmal from the Tennessee Titans. They added J.C. Latham and Lloyd Cushenberry, but that's 2 out of 5 guys. That's 2 out of 5 guys for Will Levis. And when you have somebody like Will Levis, who at this point I think is at a similar position that somebody like Daniel Jones was in his second year, where he just is going to need to continue to get more time to get comfortable. When you don't give him an offensive line to work out, it's going to be a disaster. And it's unfortunate because the offensive attack is very, very impressive. Tony
It
Pollard,
is. It's
Calvin Ridley,
good
DeAndre
offense,
Hopkins.
but
They picked up Tyler Boyd from Cincinnati.
you
There's a
don't
lot of
have
great offensive weapons on this team, but if you cannot protect your quarterback,
exactly.
it's going to
And
be
when Levis
so
can't make
so
solid
hard for them.
decisions,
And when you look at their offense last year, 28th in total offense, 29th in passing offense, 17th in rushing offense. Will Levis
that's why it's been so interesting going through these mock drafts because with a team like Tennessee, you're asking where they go. Um, do you go interior offensive line or maybe even get another franchise tackle like a Will Campbell or Kelvin Banks? Or do you go quarterback? But do you put that rookie quarterback in a position where he's having the same pressure? Is that really going to be better for him? Or do you hunker down, get a offensive lineman and allow Levis or Mason Rudolph one more year? Even though we pretty much know what those two guys are by this point. Even though Levis has had a
got
terrible
sacked the fourth
offensive
most
line position.
times last year. They were 29th in passing yards. Sure, you added the weapons, you added the superstar players, but if you don't have that foundation of an offensive line, Will Levis is not going to be able to get those guys the ball. It's a similar position of what the Denver Broncos were dealing with a couple of years back, where they had very solid young players, but their offensive
So
line
far,
just didn't
I feel
allow
like I haven't done
guys
that
such as
bad.
Joe Flacco and Drew
I
Lock
think I've just
to really
blown it
perform
on.
and
I
give
think
their
Denver
weapons
was
the
the only one
ball.
that I blew
And I
it
think
on
it's going to be a
in
similar
terms of
position
record.
here where you're going to see Tony Pollard be
And
relied
maybe
on
the
a
Colts, you could
lot.
say.
I'm
Colts,
not
I blew it a
sure
little
if he
bit.
has that type of consistency. I'm not sure if he can take that much wear and tear on him.
All right, let's get on to the next one here. Okay, here we go. Now we're with the AFC East video. Yeah, let's see what I got.
Early season record predictions here. I have the New York Jets coming in first place at 12-5. The Miami Dolphins are in
That
second
was a
at
bad one.
11-6. I have the Buffalo Bills coming in third at 8-8. I have the New England Patriots not only as the last team in the AFC East, I have them as the last team in the NFL going at 1-16.
Okay, now this was a blown one. This was a really blown one, but a lot has happened in the AFC East. I'll be honest. This is obviously before the major amount of turmoil that happened within the Jets front office in firing Robert Saleh, trading for Devontae Adams, obviously Aaron Rodgers not panning out the way that we thought. This comes with the fact that Josh Allen, even though he had 0 weapons to start the year, has had an MVP season, and guys like Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakir and all those guys have been suitable weapons. This comes from the fact that the Miami Dolphins lost Tua early in the season and are clearly not the team that we ever thought them to be. And then the Patriots outperformed a little bit, but in a pretty similar spot. But yeah, this division was. I think this division was one of the tougher ones, though.
Abysmal, nightmarish season for New England. But let's hop into this, starting with the New York Jets, who, like I mentioned, are going 12-5, have a major jump from last year's team, and I think that that's pretty warranted, seeing as with the type of additions that they have made from the previous year. Von Kinlaw, and they also drafted Olumiyu Fashanu in the first round. Now, when it comes to this New York situation, they were in a really solid spot to be a playoff contender in the AFC the previous year. They had a top 3 defense in the entire league. They had likely the best secondary and the best cornerback in the league in Sauce Gardner. That passing game, absolutely.
And Sauce has been so disappointing this year. This has been one of the worst fall offs for players, despite the Jets still having a pretty solid passing offense, or passing defense. Sauce has not been the type of player that he was the previous year. And as for the draft picks and the additions, they just have not worked out. Like Fashanu, is he even playing? Is Fashanu playing? Let me look this up real quick. Depth chart. Is he starting? No, he's hurt. He's on IR. So he's been hurt. Smith, I think, has been hurt. And which we expected. Yeah, Smith's been hurt. Moses has been hurt. Smith's on IR. So it was
Absolutely
exactly
terrorized
the
the
things that
entire
we
league
were
last year.
scared
And
of.
with adding in
Exactly what
key
happened
pieces
did
of
happen.
pass rushing, such as Javon Kinlaw from San Francisco, such as Hassan Reddick, I think it is going to improve this defense even more because now you're going to be pressuring the quarterback. You're going to be making the quarterback have to make quick decisions. And with that, if you are facing more inexperienced
People have been able to
quarterbacks,
run on the
they
Jets,
are going to be running
especially in the red zone.
into a lot of simple and easy mistakes that you can feed off of, that you can get turnovers off of, and that you can then turn into points. Which, speaking of points, was something that was the Achilles heel for New York last year. Now, of course, this simply came down to an injury, a first quarter, first game injury for the newly signed Aaron Rodgers, who tore his Achilles. We're going to have to see how he rebounds, how he improves as a quarterback this year. But following that Rodgers injury, to me, it was very clear that New York wasn't very prepared really at all for the incoming of Rodgers, that they did not have the offensive roster, the offensive talent that they really wanted to build around Aaron Rodgers. Specifically,
They did
on
this
the
year, but once
offensive
again,
line, it was an
no offensive
absolutely
line.
terrible offensive line.
And Rodgers has taken a step
That
back.
gave
Don't
up
get
the
me wrong.
fourth most sacks in the league. And they went ahead and they patched that up. Now, granted, they got some older guys. They got Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses. Tyron Smith, especially, you have to really be concerned with just simply based off of his injury history. Has only played 13 games
Put on IR.
in the last two
Shawnee
seasons.
is
Morgan
on
Moses
IR now
definitely
too,
isn't
like I
getting any
mentioned.
younger, and he has had not as much trouble, but a little bit of trouble with injury. But you bring those two in, you grab yourself some insurance by drafting Fashanu in the first round. And with his rawness, with his pure athletic ability, with his speed, I think that he could be somebody that, if not used right away on the outside, could be slid into the inside. I mean, it's a roster that still needs some improvement on this offensive line, really at that center and right guard spot. So maybe if you slide him in at right guard, possibly give him a chance there. That's 4 out of the 5
Now that he's
offensive
hurt,
linemen
is he
right now.
going to
That
have
is
the
a
same
huge improvement to what they had last
agility
year.
that he had
And
before?
protecting Rodgers is
And
really
he
going to
hasn't
be
been
their
able to
number
play
one
that many
priority
games?
because obviously coming off of an Achilles injury, we're not sure how mobile he's going to be. We're not sure how productive he's going to be able to be with his legs. And that's a huge blow to his game and his play style. He does very well getting outside of the pocket, extending plays when they seem dead. You know, that's where the main moneymaker is there with
Rodgers
Aaron
was the
Rodgers. And
first.
so
Rodgers, in my opinion, was the first
keeping a very solid offensive line,
Jaden
keeping
Daniels
defenders
to the
away
point
from
where
him,
he
and allowing him to
could
stay more
make
in the pocket is
any
going to
negative
be key
play
for
into
them to
positive
have
yardage.
offensive success.
Most
And
talented, maybe
outside of the
that's most
offensive
accomplished,
line,
most talented guy.
they added a
Far.
couple more weapons as well. Again, it didn't really seem like they were that prepared. Really, outside of Garrett Wilson, they really didn't have anybody that was very reliable to go out there and be a number one receiver for Aaron Rodgers. They added Mike Williams from the Los Angeles Chargers, who I think could be a perfect number 2 wide receiver. I
Has
think
been
he was a
very
great
disappointing
fit
as well.
as a number 2 wide receiver in Los Angeles, somebody who can play on the outside very well. And next to Garrett Wilson, you now have your top 2 receivers right there that are going to be able to aid Aaron Rodgers in the passing game. And of course, he has Breece Hall behind him, somebody who came on great at the end of the season, was a little bit disappointing for me towards the beginning of the season, but is a very solid pass catching back, speed back, gets out in front of defenders and is able to extend plays. So it's great there. It's just as they had last year, finishing in second place last year behind the Buffalo Bills on the tiebreaker. They finished second place behind the New York Jets in my prediction. Now, when you look at the Miami Dolphins, they have continued year after year after year to build up and continue to be an offensive powerhouse in the NFL, and they did not falter last year. They were the number 1 total offense in the league last year. They were the number 1 passing offense. They were the number 2
Mike McDaniel needs to be worried as well.
Scoring, excuse me, sorry. They protected Tua very well, 28th.
Because now that your offense is not playing well, and that's what you're supposed to be good at.
And it is incredible to me that with this offense that they have, with how effective they've been able to be, 70 points on the Denver Broncos in one game last year that they have not been able to have any playoff success, not making it out of the wild card round. What has been the Achilles heel for them? Defense. Defense. Sure, you have Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Raheem Mostert, Tua. You have Devon Achane now on that offensive side. But the defense has really what has been bringing them down. Now, granted, the defense
And once
last year
again, it was a
wasn't
flip. The
horrible. It was
defense
actually
has
a
been the
huge
good
improvement
part
to
of
what
this
they've had
team
in years
this year.
past. 10 total defense. They were 7th in
Top
rushing
10
defense.
defense.
They were 15th in passing defense. So not horrible, about a top 10 average. Where they gave up their points was in the red zone. 28th ranked red zone defense last year. And really, when you watch them, it almost seemed like they gave up. They just could not hold these teams on the goal line, whether it was holding them to a 1 or 2 yard
passing yards,
rushing game to get a
loud.
touchdown, or simply cutting off a simple crossing, slant, or fade route in the passing game. They gave up a lot of touchdowns in the red zone. And to me, they didn't really have anything to really improve them in that fact. They had to go cheaper when it came to cornerback to go across from Jalen Ramsey. They let go of Xavier Howard. They were able to get Kendall Fuller, somebody who is very, very solid when it comes to man defense.
I mean,
they also cheap out. They let go of Jerome
defense.
Baker, which was something that was very surprising, but they got Jordan Brooks from the Seattle Seahawks, somebody who I think is a little bit of an improvement, especially for the cheaper price that you get back. I love Jordan Brooks at linebacker, at rushing linebacker. But outside of that, they lost a lot of depth, especially at that linebacker spot. You lose Jerome Baker. They lost Andrew Van Ginkel. They lost Emmanuel Ogbah, who could play both linebacker and DN. And they lost their big man in the middle. They lost Christian Wilkins. So you look at a team that was 7th in rushing defense, 28th in red zone defense. That means that they were giving up a lot on the goal line. It's going to get even worse for them when you can't plug up that run in the middle. It's going to get even worse for them when you're not going to be able to put pressure on the quarterback when it's 3rd and goal from the 4, 5, 6, 7 yard line. Christian Wilkins was a huge, huge part of that, and it was a big loss. And with them not being able to have a similar linebacker depth, it's really coming down to both Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb. That duo, who
Miami would have had them
I need to remind you,
10-7.
are both coming off of pretty serious injuries from the previous season.
So
Phillips tore his Achilles, and then you obviously had Bradley
Jets
Chubb
and the
tearing
Bills
his ACL.
Were the bad hits.
Chubb has been somebody that has been known to be a little bit injury prone, and behind those two, there's really not much there. I believe they signed Shaq Barrett. They got Shaq Barrett, so is him there. But there's not really much to go off of. And so if you start running into injury problems once again on that defense, your backups are going to begin to let them down. Now, they do have a 5 win from the previous year. You have the Miami Dolphins staying the same. Now we have a team that's taken a little bit of a step back, and that is the Buffalo Bills. Previously, like I said, went 11-6, won the division last year.
They were another wild card team where some people, like the Chargers,
and to be honest, I think that they could go even lower than that. I could see them going below 500. I could see them potentially falling into 6-10, 5-11 territory if they're not able
in hindsight, that was
get off to a very, very quick start. And the reason being just how many of the big losses that they have, and the fact that, similar to Miami, they weren't able to fill these holes. In my opinion, the Josh Allen era is officially over in Buffalo. Now, Allen will continue to be successful statistically, especially with his big arm. He's going to be throwing passes down the field. He's going to be extending plays. He's going to be getting big-time touchdowns and big-time highlights. We know that from him. But as far as the core that surrounded him, as far as a team that has visited the conference finals, the conference championship numerous times, the divisional round numerous times, that core is no longer here. They traded away Stephon Diggs. They let go of their safety duo in Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. They lose Gabe Davis, who was somebody who was helping Josh Allen
was going to be
plays.
huge,
somebody who was making up when Stephon Diggs was not showing up.
Lost for them.
They lost some serious pass rush help, such as Leonard Floyd. They lost Tyrell Dodson, and
defense hasn't been amazing. But
and they lost veteran center Mitch Morse as well.
They've been able to force turnovers a lot of the time.
Score off of those turnovers. Kind of above average guys and rookies that I don't really see being able to make a huge impact right away. Curtis Samuel, I think he could potentially fill that Gabe Davis role, but when you're looking at a number one wideout, you don't have that now. You have Curtis Samuel, you have Mac Hollins. They drafted Keon Coleman, who I was just about to get to, I believe in the second round with like the 33rd overall pick. He's somebody that offers some great height, some great physicality on the outside, but do you
Coleman's
really think that
so
he's going to
good
be
this
on the
year.
level of a
Physicality
Stephon
is
Diggs, even a
unmatched.
Gabe
And
Davis
even
in
at
his
his
first
size,
year?
being able to
Don't think that
separate
he's
off
going
the
to have
route.
that type of production. The offensive line is a little bit weaker for them, so running game is a little bit harder. So as we talked about in last episode with the AFC South, it's going to make Buffalo's offense a lot more predictable. And the schedule that they have is a lot more difficult than what we have seen in the AFC East. 23rd easiest schedule in the league, having to go up against Jacksonville, Baltimore, Houston, Seattle, Kansas City, San Francisco, LA, and
They've
Detroit.
won a
Some
lot of those
serious,
games.
serious defenses. Some
They've won
teams
a
that
lot
also
of
hold
games.
some serious firepower. And when you look at the fact that they don't have Tre'Davious White anymore, now they don't have Hyde and Poyer.
Niners.
The passing game is going to be really, really difficult for this
Lions.
Buffalo team to stop.
Beat the Jets, beat the Dolphins.
Especially, it's going to be a big dip off from what they had last year.
Twice. Beat the
9th
Dolphins.
total defense,
You saw the
7th
Ravens
total
and
passing defense. They struggled a little bit on the run. 4th total scoring
in
defense.
terms of big games.
4th most sacks, 4th most interceptions. You're not going to be getting those turnovers anymore with the type of players that you have, with the replacements that you made. You're just not. When you don't have Poyer and Hyde, you don't have Tre'Davious White anymore, you're going to take a dip. Those turnovers are not going to happen, which means your offense is not going to have as much opportunities. And I really think that that's what saved
They've still
Buffalo.
been able to do it.
Is that, sure, maybe there were times where their offense wasn't firing on all cylinders, but the
defensive turnover.
defense just consistently were getting them stops. The secondary was
6
consistently
interceptions.
forcing turnovers, and because of that, they got multiple chances to go out and to score, to either take leads or extend leads.
Fourth and
They're not going
third
to have
and fourth fumbles.
that anymore. And when Josh Allen,
tied
we've
for
seen
first
before,
in
when Josh
fumbles
Allen goes
recovered.
into these little dips, when he starts to get into
Insane,
these
man.
bad little paths, these bad little stretch of games, it's very, very hard for him to come out of that swamp. It's very, very hard for him to get out of that slump, to kind of wake up and get back into the mode he has. And I'm not sure if he has the weapons to get out of those slumps and to begin firing. So,
but he's completely changed his game. That's the thing about it. He is now, he was a dual threat before, but he has now become a full dual threat. Like, especially at the beginning of the season, what we saw to Josh Allen's legs was crazy. The thing is, he's a lot bigger than Lamar is, especially body wise. So he can take a lot of hits and he can break some tackles. Whereas Lamar, the tricky part with Lamar is just catching him. But once you catch him, then you can get him down. But with Josh, he may not have the electric speed that Lamar has, but
again, for
little bit heftier
Buffalo,
to break
it's really
some
going to depend on, can they get off to a quick start. If they could go on and beat Jacksonville, I think that's a very solid win. If they could go on, if they could beat Seattle, if they could just beat these above average teams and begin to build momentum,
which they
and
went
not
3-1
into
to
these
start
low
the first
dips,
4 games.
I think they could be average, above average, maybe even possibly good if they steal a couple of close division games. But outside of that, if they start getting killed early,
Beat the Dolphins
if
by
Houston
21,
ravages them,
Jets
if
by
Baltimore
3,
blows them out, if they get into the later
Dolphins
part
by
of season,
3,
of
so
the season,
they've won those close
and
division
San
games.
Francisco and Detroit has their way with
Patriots
them,
by
it's
3.
going to be a very, very long season for Buffalo fans and a complete 180 from what we have seen in previous seasons. Speaking of what we have seen in previous seasons, New England Patriots are not the same team. Let's just say it how it is. The Patriots were not good last year. The Patriots will not be good this year. I have them 1-15, the final team in all of the NFL. And this comes from a team that,
and right now,
like I said, didn't have a very great season last year. They went 4-13. They get 3 less wins. But what I will say about this New England team, while they lack the winning style, while they lack
and they're probably going to lose
some talent in certain areas, they do have a couple of little gems that I am enjoying. They do have, in my opinion, what could be a starting foundation for a team
Bears,
5,
Jets,
6, 7, 8
Bengals
years in the future that
wins.
could start contending
It's kind of crazy
for a championship.
Especially the Bears and the Bengals.
Obviously, losing the greatest coach of all time, that's going to hurt. Whether Bill was doing a great job last season or not, that's obviously going to hurt them. And bringing in a brand new coach who is very young, knows the Patriots way, but is still very young, in Gerard Mayo in his first season, there's obviously going to be a different vibe in the locker room. There's going to be a different vibe in the building. And we're going to see an entirely different Patriots team. Whether that's going to be positive or negative, that's entirely up to Gerard Mayo and how the team reacts to his coaching style. But it's going to affect
It's
them
hard to
either
tell
way.
whether
I
it's been
think
positive or
what
negative
the
because the
key
team
is
has been
for
so
New
bad.
England.
The team
I'm going to
talent-wise
say
is
I'm
so
going to get
bad.
right up into my mic right now. The key for New England: do not rush Drake May. I'm going to say it again for the people who didn't hear me in the back.
Ow.
Do not rush Drake May. They signed Jacoby Brissett out of free agency. If Jacoby Brissett has to start for the first 10 to 12 games,
And what did they do? They rushed him in because they beat Cincinnati and they felt that Drake needed to step in because they were losing control. Why? It beats me. They were already in a really bad position. If it was my team, which obviously I'm not an NFL head coach, I probably wouldn't have started Drake May the entire season, but they did. And he's had some moments. Don't get me wrong, he's had some moments. He's shown ability to throw the ball downfield. He's elusive, has solid pocket presence. But I'm just worried how this is going to affect his confidence next year because this is such a bad team and the offense has been terrible. And he doesn't have receivers, and he doesn't have an offensive line, and he doesn't have an offensive-minded head coach. I could go on and on. So, was it the right decision? Okay, sure, maybe you got one win out of it, 2 wins, but
that is
I didn't
fine.
see the benefit of
You were
doing
not
it.
contending. There is no need to put May in early, to put him in with this bad roster, this bad receiving core with a bad offensive line. And there was no need to destroy his confidence early and get him on a bad start to his career. Allow him to sit on the side. Allow him to learn from Jacoby Brissett, who has had some success on some NFL franchises. And allow him to build some starting chemistry with head coach Gerard Mayo, because whether they like it or not, these two are the future. These two are going to have to figure out how to play together because
with Mayo,
I'm not sure if the Patriots really have the experience with firing a coach. So if Mayo gets off to a very slow start in his first couple of seasons, I'm not sure if I see them firing him. I think they're going to try to make this work. I think that they're going to try to mold him into something that Bill Belichick was. So whether they like it or not, Mayo and May are the future of this team. They're going to have to work together. So let him have time to develop that. But enough about May. Let's look at some bright spots on this team. First of all, I absolutely love the pairing of Drake May and Jalen Polk out of Washington. I love that pick. Polk
and
is
Polk
not the most
has
effective
been
route runner,
terrible as well.
but he has great hands, solid size to be a number
Great
2
hands,
receiver
but he's
in the
been
league.
dealing with drops.
And he's somebody that, once again, gives New England not only a solid foundation, but time to potentially go out and get a number 1 type of receiver. I feel like Jalen Polk can be very similar to the role that Mike Williams plays as a number 2 wideout, being one of the
him and Mike are in very similar situations. As I'm going to go to the next video with you guys, but Polk and Williams are in very similar situations, as in they drop the ball a lot and they cost their team a lot of big time plays. Polk has been very disappointing for me. He was one of my favorite receivers going out of college with Penix and Washington, and it just has not worked. Oh, look at me. I'm wearing a hat this video. Let's see. Let's try to find if I can see. Okay, so I found the video. This is the second to last video we're gonna watch because I did the NFC all-in-one video previously before this. So this is the AFC North. We're gonna look through this one. Let's go.
Let's hop into this AFC North, the play-by-play podcast, AFC North 2024-2025 early predictions. I have the Baltimore Ravens finishing in first place at 13-3. I have the Cincinnati Bengals finishing in second at 10-5. I have the Cleveland Browns finishing in third at 9-8, and I have the Pittsburgh Steelers finishing in last place with a record of 6-11. That's right. Once again, we find this division with 3 out of the 4 teams having winning records. And this time around, I'm going to start from the bottom up. So let's start.
And they still can. They still can, and all 3 teams, there's still a possibility for the AFC North to have 3 playoff teams if Cincinnati can get in this weekend. But it was the wrong team. With Cleveland, I'm obviously gonna explain what I talked about. But with Cleveland, I thought that Watson was going to recover his career. He did not. And also, just looking at Cleveland from a weapons perspective, there was a lack of. I think that Cooper was very, very flat to begin the year, and they obviously traded him off later. Chubb coming off of an injury, you can't expect a lot from him. So it was just a bad situation to begin with, and we'll see what I say. They also had the number 1 defense last year, I believe.
6-11. What is the huge deal
I think
here
that was a big
with the Pittsburgh Steelers? All eyes on the Pittsburgh Steelers this year will be on their quarterback room. The Steelers go from having Kenny Pickett, somebody who coming out of the draft was the most pro-ready quarterback in an awful, awful quarterback class, but somebody who was looked at as not having a very high potential, not having a very high ceiling, being very, very limited as to how far he would possibly be able to take a team. And that proved correct. Had a couple of solid seasons with Pittsburgh, but it was clear that with him behind the wheel, they were going to have a ceiling on them as a team, because you're only as good as your captain is. You're only as good as the man who is throwing the ball, getting you points. And so to combat that, they go out and they get one of the most experienced veterans, playoff veterans, Super Bowl champion veterans in Russell Wilson. And they also go ahead and trade a 6th-round pick to the Chicago Bears and get an explosive young backup in Justin Fields. Now,
Jalen Milroe
Wilson ended his 2 years in Denver with a strained, exhausted, and pretty much broken relationship with Denver. It was a situation in Denver where he was really restricted as far as his character, what he was allowed to do from an offensive perspective. And when he was let go, they completely released the reins off of him and let him go wild. And that just simply was not the same system that he was under in Seattle. He was under a very babied situation with Pete Carroll in Seattle, in which he had an all-pro legendary power back.
Russell Wilson, there's this, people throw around the term system player. I feel like we at some point can call Russell Wilson that, because he was a system player under Pete Carroll's system. And then you come to Mike Tomlin, who once again is a seasoned veteran coach, doesn't allow him to get too out of hand with his decision making. Although down the stretch it has been pretty horrid. So
the best some point in the game you can start to allow him to get into scary situations along goal line situations, and alongside tough situations such as 4th and 1s, 4th and 2, 4th and 3, because all they really had to do was hand it off to Marshawn Lynch, and you got a first down. You got a touchdown.
That is the one thing.
Now that he is in Pittsburgh, there seems to be a little bit more confidence from him. There seems to be a little bit more happiness. There seems to be a little bit more freedom with the leash still on him, but it seems like he's able to get a little bit further out. And with an experienced coach in Mike Tomlin, who still really has not had an awful season in Pittsburgh, somebody who is very experienced, somebody who I believe could bring back that baby type system that Coach Pete Carroll had in Seattle. And if they do not have that with Russell Wilson, you can turn to Justin Fields. It's the exact reason that you got him. If Wilson works out, perfectly fine. Give Justin Fields a couple of years to learn behind Russell Wilson, have him become a lot more mature in his game, and
which I think is the path he showed
in Chicago.
Pittsburgh is going to go
down. But if he does not work out,
there's discussions of extending Wilson.
This is a man who, while has not grown a lot in his career, has some high explosive potential
in the year, but I'm
not only in the passing game, but in the running game as well. Has been somebody who has shown me signs of his division rival now in Lamar Jackson, somebody who could potentially rush for 500 plus, 600 plus yards as a quarterback and still continue to be successful throughout the air. you can turn to him. You can be comfortable with him taking the reins, and you can be comfortable with him being your next franchise quarterback if Russell Wilson does not work out. Now, when it comes to the rest of the roster, Pittsburgh struggles in a lot of places that a lot of their other division rivals struggle with, mainly that being the O-line room. Now, they did add Troy Fautanu to their own line room at tackle. One of my favorite offensive tackles out of Oregon State. Absolutely loved him. Thought that he was one of the most polished tackles in this draft, outside of possibly a Joe Alt that ended up in Los Angeles.
He's not even starting. He got hurt too.
They also traded Deontay Johnson, their top receiver, somebody who
ligament
did
damage
a great job in yards after catch, somebody who was very opposite from George Pickens, who now becomes their number one receiver. George Pickens, much more of a streaky guy that likes to run down the field and challenge for the ball. Deontay Johnson, somebody who has a plethora of different routes, the 5-yard slant routes, the out routes, the drag routes, the crossing routes, the streak routes. He can basically do it all. But they now got Deontay Johnson for Dante Jackson. And they hope that Dante Jackson can now add to a secondary that obviously includes Minkah Fitzpatrick. That obviously includes Joey Porter Jr. That obviously includes Deshaun Elliott. They are hoping that Dante Jackson can add to this,
which hasn't been the case. Pittsburgh's been one of the worst passing defenses in the NFL right now. Despite two players that I really like, Joey Porter Jr. and Minkah Fitzpatrick.
Secondary room and improve what has been a pretty below
Dante's an athlete. He's a really solid athlete.
Perspective. Now they
he's
did
not
have
somebody that is going to be able
to most passing interceptions in the league last year, but
intelligently recognize
in
certain plays.
25th
that's in
zone, passing yards. Excuse me, 25th in passing yards allowed last season. So now adding Dante Jackson into that, you're hoping that his speed, he can get his coverage skills up, but with his athleticism, with his pure speed, he can add on to Joey Porter Jr. and Minkah Fitzpatrick and potentially create a scary secondary in Pittsburgh. Outside of that, they did a huge acquisition, acquiring Patrick Queen away from the Baltimore Ravens. Not only do you take one of your division rivals' best defensive players, probably best defensive players on that roster, but you now pair
top players
with
do
TJ
show
Watt, who has struggled with injury concerns. So if he
Pittsburgh
goes away
shuts
with
down
injury,
the run pretty well.
Patrick Queen can definitely take over and be the leader of that defense. But he can also do an incredible job at stuffing the run. He adds to a Pittsburgh Steelers defense that was 21st in total defense last year. He adds to a Pittsburgh Steelers defense that was having a lot of trouble stuffing the run when it came into the red zone. A really solid acquisition for the Pittsburgh Steelers there.
It's one of the worst
Russell Wilson now behind the helmet,
if
he can be consistent, and if the running backs can have a quicker start than they did last year, Najee Harris had a little bit of a rough start to the season.
Great players,
Jalen Moore was able to pick up the slack early, and then Harris came on towards the end of the year. If they can have consistent play from their main
at the second corner spot,
Russell Wilson, Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth,
a little bit here.
If they could get, but when you look at these defensive stats, first in total defense, first in passing defense,
talking about the
they had the 32nd. They had the least amount of passing yards allowed. They had the 6th most sacks in the league. They had the 3rd most interceptions. They were creating turnovers. They were creating a lot of opportunities for this offense, and it fell flat. And the thing that's really making me nervous for the Cleveland Browns right now is they did not really add much this offseason when it comes to the offensive edge. In fact, they lost their tight end and Harrison Bryant to the Las Vegas Raiders, somebody who has great ability. And all they really added was Jerry Jeudy, somebody who
still has a very high potential because they've had to,
in my opinion, is one of
the
best
on the
route
field
runners
so
in
much,
this league.
and there's so many opportunities for opposing offenses
in Denver,
to score.
Wasn't
the defense
somebody
has suffered
that
a lot
showed
this year because of
an ability to possibly even be a number 2 wide receiver in this league. Nonetheless, possibly taking over for Amari Cooper after he begins to slow down at the number 1. Jerry Jeudy is somebody who I think at best right now is a solid route running slot receiver with his quickness in the league. So
Jeudy exploded as a number 1. That
because
game against Denver
you
was
added Jerry
insane.
Jeudy now, but you do have Nick Chubb coming off of a bad
The question
injury.
is he going to be able to continue into next year?
Did not really
be able to
lose
stay
much
healthy
when it
next
comes
year?
to the offensive
And are they going to be
line
able to
side
find
of
the
things. You have
right
Joel
guy behind the
Bitonio,
helm
you have
to get him
Jedrick
the
Willis,
ball?
You have Jack Conklin on that opposite side. You have David Njoku still there. So they do have some solid weapons. The question is going to be, can the wide receiver core elevate Deshaun Watson? Can Nick Chubb continue to be the Nick Chubb that we've seen him be before
I
injury?
don't think that Deshaun Watson
And can this
elevated the
defense
receiver
be the
core.
same? Because
I
when you
think
look
it
at the
was the
defense,
opposite.
there are still incredible players. This is still slated to be one of the best defenses, one of the best pass rushes in the league. Do not get me wrong. Zadarius Smith, Dalvin Tomlinson, Myles Garrett. They added a great linebacking group, a great linebacking rotation of Jordan
By the
Jordan
way,
Hicks
pass rush,
and Devin
Cleveland
Bush,
is
adding in some much
Cleveland is
needed
13th in
speed
sacks.
onto
It's
this
not
defense.
terrible,
But when you look at the secondary side
but
of
it's
things,
not the number
you do
one that
not
they had
have
last year.
anybody across from Denzel Ward. And speaking as a Denver Broncos fan, that number 2 corner spot is a huge, huge deal. Denver has one of the best cornerbacks
They
in
gave up the
Patrick
14th
Surtain
most
II right
rushing
now.
yards.
And they are struggling in the pass game because that number 2 corner continues to be an issue. They continues to be targeted by opposing teams. And when you look at what they have, Greg Newsome II, Martin Emerson Jr., not very high profile names that you would like in that spot. So the question for Cleveland fans is, how much is that number 2 cornerback going to matter? Is the pass rush going to be able to get there in time on the quarterbacks before that hole is torn any larger? If it's not able to, they're going to have a difficult time because they also have a very difficult season ahead. The 30th easiest schedule, the third most difficult schedule in the league right now, having to face very solid quarterbacks in Dak Prescott with the Dallas Cowboys. You have Trevor Lawrence with the Jacksonville Jaguars, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, Tua Tagovailoa. Those are all quarterbacks that they are going to have to face, and all quarterbacks that have some very, very solid weapons around them, assuming guys such as CeeDee Lamb return to the team, assuming guys such as Xavier Worthy work out in Kansas City, and assuming that Trevor Lawrence can get back up to form. They are facing some very solid quarterbacks, some very solid weapons. And if that second cornerback spot cannot hold, and if that pass rush cannot get there, they are going to get fried in the passing game. If they can get there, they're going to have a much easier time because the running game is not going to be there against them. They're going to absolutely stuff any running back, swallow any running back that runs up the middle or even on the outside. But if the pass rush cannot get there, that number 2 cornerback spot is going to matter a lot more than I think a lot of people are looking at. And when you put in the factor that they have a very solid division, I had them up at around 14-3. I had them actually taking an improvement from their 13-4 record in the previous season. But as I began going into the games and as I really started to look at this team, there are some holes, just like in Cleveland, that I cannot ignore with this Ravens team. There are some losses that they had that are huge when looking at the talent in this team. And I'm just not sure. I think that they made some very solid moves, but from a experience perspective, I don't think that they're there right now in terms of competing for a playoff spot. Now, the Ravens ended last year with the best rushing offense in the league. That was spearheaded by none other than Gus Edwards. Now, of course, Lamar Jackson added into that. We cannot take that away from him. But it was a running back room that was spearheaded by a power back in Gus Edwards and Dalvin Cook, who was picked up late in the season in free agency. But now, Baltimore walks into next season with one of, if not the top power back in the league in Derrick Henry. Now, the question now is, how much does Henry have left in the tank at 30 years old? How much more can Henry carry? And especially now with some of the losses that the Ravens have had on their offensive line. They lost Kevin Zeitler at guard. They lost Morgan Moses at tackle.
And the way that he plays the game.
Derrick Henry is going to be facing a lot more competition when it comes to
second most
defenses
yards
being able to get in the backfield. He is going to have to be doing a lot more work that I'm not sure he can continue to do at a very high level at 30 years old. Now, because of Jackson's mobility, the O-line is not really a huge priority in the passing game because he goes outside of the pocket all the time. He's going to play all plays.
He's going to play
and get positive yardage out of plays that are virtually dead. But Henry is going to need some help to be productive. And it's just a toss-up right now as to if the Ravens have enough to support him for another 1,000-yard season. That's a huge hole, the offensive line. Another huge hole is defensively. the Ravens have a lot to answer to. Like I said with Pittsburgh, losing Patrick Queen to a division rival absolutely stings, losing one of your top players. And Jadeveon Clowney and Ronald Darby are two pieces that contributed to what was one of the highest turnover-rated defenses last year. That is right. They had these 6 total defense, the 6th best passing defense. They were first in sacks last year. They were third in interceptions. They were the best scoring defense. They were able to get turnovers and score off of those turnovers consistently. But now the pass rush is gone. The linebacker stuffing up
And
run
the
in the
crazy
middle
thing
is
about
gone.
this, like, once
One
again,
of your
it's
top
flipped.
corners alongside Marlon
Pat,
Humphrey is
the
gone.
rushing defense
And
has
you
been
replace
so
them
incredible.
with, I think, some solid talent. You grab Nate Wiggins from
That
Clemson,
front four has been able to hold
late in the
but the
first round at
secondary has been
quarterback.
terrible.
somebody who I think as an athlete was probably one of the best athletes in this draft class this year. Somebody who I think right now could do perfectly at plugging in the slot position. You got Roger Rosengarten at offensive tackle, somebody who in the future could definitely plug in and replace somebody such as Morgan Moses. And you have Adisa Isaac, who I believe they got in the 3rd or 4th round, who once again, from an athletic perspective, is going to do a very solid job. But
Parch my hat.
right now, you'd rather have Patrick Queen. Right now, you'd rather have Ronald Darby. Right now, you'd rather have
I think the rushing
Jadeveon Clowney.
defense
Right now,
performed better than they did last
you'd rather
year.
have Morgan Moses, even with some potential injury concerns with him.
Yeah.
And when you look at the Ravens' offensive side, continuing from the offensive line, there's still not really great weapons in the passing game. Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman have been very good X-factor wide receivers. They have been people that have shown up solid
Baltimore said
ability
one of the
when it
best
comes to
offensive lines in the
speed.
league. And Zay Flowers, man, he has been. I'm going to skip forward a little bit here to Cincy. Zay Flowers has been the surprise of the season for me. That man has shown he has taken a huge step in his career, and I look at him very, very similar to Lad McConkey. They're very similar players. I know McConkey ran a little bit faster of a 40-yard dash than Flowers did. Zay's a little bit more physical, can jump up a little bit more. Zay has taken and it's been the boost, the breakthrough that Baltimore has needed, because they haven't had really great receivers to go around Lamar in his entire career. Marquise Brown really didn't work out. You had Zay Flowers. Rashad Bateman's been okay. So if he can continue to develop this way and be their number one guy going forward, that is going to be a huge, huge blow
Natty
take
Bengals
off
in first
for an
place,
offense
going
that is
from
now
9-8
really
to
relying on the
11-6
run
now.
for their running back and quarterback.
Looking at the Bengals, they were 5-6 last year before Joe Burrow went down with a wrist injury. Most of this team's deficiencies came down to the inability to run the ball and the defense overall not being good enough. Now,
Chase Brown also,
as
a big
we talked
surprise this
about,
season. Didn't really know much about
with
him.
the lack of running the ball, it comes down to what has been the sole focus for Joe Burrow's entire career, and that is the fact that he has lacked a solid offensive line. Now,
He still doesn't have a good
Cincinnati
offensive line.
has looked to address this. They did address tackle. Tackle was a huge, huge get for them this year. They were able to get Trent Brown. They signed Trent Brown. And they were
11
able to draft
sacks allowed
Demarius Mims. I believe he's
this
from
year.
Alabama.
44.
But
which might
while the
actually be
interior
good
may
when
show
it
some
comes to
weakness,
the Bengals.
it may allow for Burrow to have a little bit more time, which is good. And it may allow Joe Mixonless backfield to be able to hit to the outside and get some solid runs. But the question is,
Which it has.
are these running backs now going to be able to have any kind of ability like Joe Mixon? The running back room is now spearheaded by Zach Moss. You have Chase Brown behind him, two running backs who are really power backs, really backup running backs, not really starting caliber. There's just not a lot of
What is
prestige
this for Chase Brown?
when it
Is this
comes to that
his-
running back room. So now you have very solid
he's
tackles. You could
24. Is this his
possibly
third year?
do an outside running game to the outside, but now you don't have the talent at running back. Now,
Second.
it is unsure when it comes to the receiver room what the attitude of T. Higgins is going to be to start the season. He is going to be playing with Cincinnati this season. I would still potentially look, especially if he is not producing that much, for them to move him at the trade deadline, because I think that there are a lot of teams that could potentially benefit off of a T. Higgins, such as possibly maybe the Dallas Cowboys. Maybe you look at a team that is lower in the standings, maybe Minnesota or Chicago tries to add to their stacked receiver rooms. Who knows? Who knows? I think that there's definitely still going to be a market out there for T. Higgins. So look for them to move him at the trade deadline. But he is going to start the season. And they did gain Mike Gesicki at starting tight end, but they did lose Tyler Boyd. And that puts a lot of pressure if T. Higgins is not producing on the shoulders of Jamar Chase.
Which, once again, I'm going to skip through because I was pretty short with this one as we find the next one. But Chase has been phenomenal. Higgins has came back. If there's one thing for Cincy to do, they need to re-sign Higgins this year. And as a Broncos fan, I really want T. Higgins in our wide receiver room. He is just so explosive. Does a great job of having moves. Now this one's the full NFC one. What are we at? We're at an hour 40, so I think I'm pretty much just gonna let
everybody
this one
to episode
run
36
through.
of the Play by Play podcast. I'm Diego Gallegos, where today we will be doing a full early preview
I'm gonna try to
Three.
skip through.
of the last 10 Super Bowls of the past decade. The most recent one being the LA Rams over the season. At least me personally, I had going in the top 10 of that year's draft. So just going through the conferences, just looking at everything, we're going to start in
We'll do the
the
divisions.
NFC North. One of the
All right.
divisions that I think people should have a huge eye on. I think that this is going to be one of the most exciting divisions in the NFL, as it always is. I think that we're going to have some incredible division rival
One thing I
games,
want to point out is my
and it's gonna
evolution of my thumbnails. Like this one, I just put literally the NFC logo and then the 16 quarterbacks. Where it looks kind of cool, but some of them are in front of others. Like Bryce Young is in front of Dak for some reason. Like they're not all just like behind each other.
come down to the wire in a photo
It's weird.
finish on who finishes atop this division. So
Kirk's like way back there.
way too early NFC North
All right, let's
predictions. I have the Detroit Lions finishing first at 13-4. I have the Green Bay Packers finishing second at 12-5. I have the Chicago Bears in third at 9-8, and finally to finish it out, the Minnesota Vikings at 5-12.
So I know I said I was going to play it through. This was surprising for me, because you had the Bears and Vikings. Even the Vikings are even better than the Bears record I had predicted, but yeah, the Bears and Vikings really swapping places. Darnold was a pleasant surprise, but for the Bears, again, I think that we really underestimated the effects of a bad coach and a bad offensive line. We just looked at Keenan, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Cole Kmet, DeAndre Swift, and we said there's going to be no one that's going to be able to stop them and Caleb Williams together. And the offensive line has just dragged them down so much. Eberflus was terrible. It was clear that Shane Waldron, Thomas Brown, they're not the answers offensively. So Chicago needs a change, and I'm hoping that's Ben Johnson. If it's not, Zach Robinson from Atlanta, Joe Brady from Buffalo, they need an
So
offensive
just going
line.
through this division
Please,
real
Chicago,
quickly,
but
with Detroit at number
another one that we
they're
really
really the most
underestimated.
established team going to the NFC conference last year. They didn't really lose a lot. You still have your quarterback in Jared Goff, your main weapons in Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta. You have Jahmyr Gibbs in the backfield. I think Dan Campbell, while he's not one of my favorite coaches, just seeming as he tends to take a lot of risks that doesn't seem to pay off, I still think that he has a lot of energy. He's a great motivator, and the defense is there for sure as well.
They have gotten more
I think
consistent on
that
fourth down this
last
year.
year they just ran into a few problems. Maybe just with the youth. Maybe we
And I
just
want to
with
give
that
credit
team
to the
not being too
Lions because this
experienced deep into
team
the
has
playoffs,
gone
maybe a
through
coaching
hell with
lack of
injuries,
experience
man.
that they fell short to a team like San
And they're
Francisco,
still
who has
playing
been
well.
there before. But I think that this is a team that's absolutely going to
So the Broncos get outed
trailblaze
first. I'm
throughout
rooting
the
for
NFC
Detroit.
conference, throughout the entire regular season. I have them going 5-1 in their division. It's going to be super fun to see this Detroit Lions team work and possibly try and get to the end in the Super Bowl. And behind that, I have the Green Bay Packers, another team that I think is going to be really competitive. I have making the playoffs at 12-5. Again, not too many pieces lost. Jordan Love is obviously still your main piece. The offensive line is a little bit downgraded, as we've seen. Bakhtiari
The
has
Packers have
has
been a
come off
team
the
that I
books
haven't
the past
actually been
couple of
watching a
years.
lot. I'll be
And I
honest.
am not as confident in their weapons as something like Chicago or Detroit.
I think that guys like Christian Watson are solid receivers, good receivers, but aren't somebody that can
Top 10
typically
offense.
be a number one. I would like to see
Full
somebody maybe
passing.
like Romeo Dobbs step into that role
I think Josh
a little
Jacobs
bit
has been a
more to take
huge
over
addition
a
to
little
that
bit
team this
more.
year, though.
I think the
He had
defense
a
is going
very
to be
slow
okay.
start,
And
but down
again,
the
I
stretch,
think that with Chicago's youth, I think that with Minnesota's lack of a quarterback, I think that the Green Bay is going to have an edge on some of these division games, just based on either having higher talent or a bigger experience gap in the end. Which brings me to Chicago, who I have that sitting at 9-8. I think this is a consensus where most people have them, and I think it's going to be a pretty up and down season, just based because this is a pretty fresh franchise. New rookie quarterback Caleb Williams brought in Keenan Allen. They obviously had DJ Moore on the books already, and Cole Kmet as well. DeAndre Swift, the running back. You have Romeo Dunze coming in. It's just going to be a huge adjustment for all of these guys to come in and start firing on all cylinders and gelling together right away. So I think that the beginning of the season is going to be a little bit rough for them, but I think by the end they're going to be
they've
firing and they're going to be
plummeted. It's
looking
been
like one of the
down
surefire
season for
offense in
Chicago.
the league. As long as Matt Eberflus can kind of stay out of the way, as he is a little bit more of a defensive coach, and just
Eberflus.
let the Bears offense work. Let the offensive coordinator do what he needs to do. Hopefully that there's trust there between the offensive coordinator and Caleb Williams, like there wasn't between Justin Fields and Luke Getzey.
Shoot, guys,
Hopefully
I'm
they're
sorry, I
on the
didn't even
same page
notice.
and
Let's
just
make this full
moving
screen.
forward. I think that they're going to be very competitive in a lot of these division games, but again, I think because of an experience thing, I think that they are going to fall, especially to the big players in Detroit and Green Bay. And Minnesota, I have them going 5-12. I know that this might be a little bit lower than most people might expect, just seeing
Okay,
as
so
the offense is so
acknowledged it.
surefire with TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison, and Justin Jefferson. But quarterback is a big thing. We all know this. And with Sam Darnold looking to be the man behind the wheel, at least for the start of the season, there hasn't been a lot of talk of JJ McCarthy coming out of training camp. There hasn't been a lot of good talk coming out of training camp. So I think that Darnold is going to be looking as the
So that's one of my top stories going into next season is what does Minnesota do? Because I really think that they signed Sam Darnold thinking, let's give him as a filler year. He's a veteran quarterback. Let's just try him out, see how he does. And if everything goes wrong, we'll hand it to JJ McCarthy. Now everything's gone right. And even though McCarthy's been injured, so he's been unable to play, they still have him sitting there in the corner. What do? Do you sign Darnold to a long-term extension, kind of do a little bit premature and just go off of one season? Do you throw the young kid in and just disregard everything that Darnold's done? Because you still have such a great offense with so many weapons. It's tough, but that is one of my top stories going into next season is what is going to happen within that quarterback room. Because McConnell and that organization have
the guy to start first. I just don't see him being somebody that is going to show up in big time games throughout the season. Sure, he's going to look absolutely incredible against teams like Carolina if they face off against New England, maybe some of the teams in the NFC South. I don't know everyone's scheduled by heart, so I'm not sure who exactly they play. But those lower 15 teams, I think Sam Darnold is going to look great. It's the same thing that we saw with him when he was in Carolina a couple of years ago.
He's been the Falcons,
but he's
Packers,
just not going to be able to put it together
Bears,
against some of these greater
Cardinals,
teams like San
Colts.
Francisco, like Detroit, like Green Bay.
He looks solid against
which
the Lions.
moves us to we go from probably one of the most
Niners.
watched divisions to probably one of the divisions that are going to be least watched this year, and that is the NFC South. Way too early NFC South division predictions. I have the Atlanta Falcons absolutely dominating at 12-3. I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in second at 7-10. The New Orleans Saints at 4-13, and I have the poor Carolina Panthers coming in at last at 2-15. I'm going to start from the bottom here just with Carolina. It's not a team that had a very impactful offseason so far. Wasn't too impressed
but
with
Falcons,
their first round
we'll
draft
get
pick.
to them.
Xavier Legette didn't feel like he was the best wide receiver on the board. Yes, they did trade for Deontay Johnson. Yes, they did upgrade the offensive line. So the situation is going to be a little bit better for Bryce Young going forward. However,
I feel like Bryce Young's confidence right now is a little bit shot. I think it's going to take him some time until he's fully firing again with full confidence. I think that there's going to be a lot of hesitation from him early out in the gate. Now, luckily, because they are in a weak division, I think that you are going to be seeing them compete. But I think that they're going to fall against
Shout out
most
to
of the
Bryce Young,
teams
man. I'm
in the
glad that he's
NFL. I
rebounding
have
this season.
these guys as a bottom 2 or 3 team. I think only New England is a team that I would put behind them, but that's because that team is so raw, has probably one of the least deep teams in the league. And then you move on to New Orleans, who was kind of the opposite. I think that they actually had a really solid draft. The thing that I liked the most was their second round pick, and Kool-Aid McKinstry was one of my highest rated cornerbacks on the board in that draft. He pairs right along with Marshawn Lattimore. It's going to be absolutely incredible. And I do like their offensive attack as well a little bit with Chris Olave in there. I think he had a lot of great moments last year on the Saints. But again, it comes down to a quarterback situation with me. It comes down to the fact that Derek Carr just really isn't the guy for the job. He's not a long-term fix. He is very much in that Sam Darnold range where he's an
I
experienced
still
veteran.
believe that.
He's somebody
There's a lot
that
of people
is going
talking about Derek
to
Carr
early
thinking that
on
he can
come
be
out
good
and is
next
going
year
to
if they get him
dominate
another
a
weapon.
lot of these teams. But later on, when you see them going against more prestigious teams, he's definitely going to struggle against the top tier defenses and top tier secondaries. You put Derek Carr against a team like the Philadelphia Eagles, it's going to be very, very difficult for New Orleans to continue to pass the ball effectively through the air. And the running attack, while it has been solid in past years, Kamara just has not had the same production that he has had at his peak. And really, it also, the Dennis Allen thing, don't believe that he is one of the top head coaches in the league. Don't think that he is really deserving as a head coach at all. I think that this is his last year on board with the Saints. I think that they're going to look to get rid of him. I think because he had former head coaching experience. I think because he was on board with some of the things that Sean Payton was doing. I think they wanted to bring him on to see if he can be that immediate replacement, but I think it is clear now that he cannot. And then you have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, another team that I think made a couple of good pickups. Graham Barton fixing that interior offensive line. He was one of the only good interior offensive linemen in this draft, and they really, really did need interior offensive line. I do obviously believe that Baker Mayfield played great last year. We're going to have to see if he can continue that play on this following season. We're going to continue to see if these older aging weapons are going to be able to continue to produce. Guys like Mike Evans, are they going to continue to have the solid years that they have been having in the past? I apologize. And is the pass rush still going to be there? Are guys like Vita Vea going to be able to step up and put pressure on the quarterback? Now, seeing again, as the South isn't that competitive, I think you're going to see them have a very solid record. I have them going undefeated against both the Saints and the Carolina Panthers. I think that they could possibly split with the Atlanta Falcons if Atlanta's having a little bit of an off day. But overall, I think that this is a team that once again just falls below that kind of average mark that you see in the NFC. And if Baker can't repeat the season that he had a year ago, it's definitely going to be a lot more of a struggle for them this year.
But they were close.
And finally, in first place, 12-3 Atlanta Falcons. This is going to be one of the most exciting situations to watch with.
So Atlanta, I know what I'm going to say. I'm going to talk about Penix and all of them and stuff like that. So we'll skip between this. But Atlanta, with them, I think that a lot of blame can be put on Kirk Cousins, yes, but I think that the defense has just been terrible. They've been one of the worst defenses for the last 3 or 4 years. They have had shown an inability to tackle. And I also think that Raheem Morris has really tanked this team. I didn't think that you could get much worse than Arthur Smith. I think Raheem Morris is giving him a run for his money. We talked about Antonio Pierce earlier. Game management has been terrible for him. He's done it multiple times within the season where he has multiple timeouts, and he's just so hesitant to call them for whatever reason it is. I don't think he's put Penix in great positions so far, and I don't think he's done great with Kirk. The defense, which he was supposed to elevate, has struggled still, even though I just don't think that defense has the personnel right now. So, yeah, defense
to the
defense
NFC
is what really
East,
tanked Atlanta
NFC
this year.
East,
way
even though
too
Kirk has
early
not been
predictions.
what we thought he has been.
We have
he was gonna
the
be.
New York Giants and last at 3 and
This is the
14.
East.
We have the Washington Commanders coming in third at 4 and 12.
Ooh.
The Dallas Cowboys at 11 and 5 in second.
It's these middle
and
teams that
the
I'm kind of
Philadelphia Eagles first, going 15 and 2. Very, very high for Philly this year. Just gonna get Washington and New York out of the way, even though they're pretty two different situations, especially when it comes to the quarterback. In New York, you have Daniel Jones kind of on his last leg, going to need a prove-it season from him this year to get a new contract from New York or to get a
How's
new
the Danny
contract
Dimes, man?
from anywhere, whether it's to be a backup, whether it's to be a starting quarterback. I very much think that he is in a Baker Mayfield situation when Mayfield was hopping around, joining with the Rams, filling in for the Rams that one game. He just needs to prove himself, but they haven't actually given him any of the offensive weapons to go out and prove himself. Sure, Malik Neighbors is on board there, but when they start to hone in on him, when they start to shut him down, there's nothing else behind this New York offense. Taking away Saquon Barkley is a huge hit to the running game, which was a huge part
Probably
of
the
New
dumbest
York
move of
offense,
last year's offseason.
especially
The
when they wanted
dumbest
to
move.
run an option play with Daniel Jones and Saquon. With Daniel Jones' mobility and just
I did
Saquon's
not.
overall
I
greatness,
think
that
me
made
and
that a
everyone
really
else
dangerous
did not know
combination.
how
But
much
now
that Saquon loss was
it's
going to
just
impact
not
them and
going to
impact them a
be.
lot.
It's not going to have the same power, and the running back is not going to be the same threat that it was
Well,
a year
Tracy,
ago.
look out for Tracy. I
And
do
like I
Tyrone
said, with
Tracy.
the wide receiver
Just don't think he
position,
has the same ability as Saquon.
not looking great. With Darren Waller now retiring, you have to be able to give Daniel Jones some weapons to be able to prove himself, and they just have not done that. And this has been a franchise that has struggled to win over the past couple of years. It's not going to end now. They still have a very, very long way to go in this rebuild. And on the other coin, you have the Washington Commanders, a team that I think is actually going to be pretty competitive this year, but it's just going to follow so many of these teams. Obviously, they have the young quarterback in Jaden Daniels. Going to be very interested to see how he does coming out of the blocks. I think he's going to be starting right away. And I think that there's going to be some growing pains for him early on. I think that he's going to be making some mistakes, possibly a lot of fumbles if he goes on the run early and gets hit pretty hard. So hopefully he can stay away from injury. But it's going to be a fun show. And kind of the opposite. I think Washington, solid offensive line, not great, but solid. I think that the targets they have, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, even the running backs that they have in the backfield, such as Brian Robinson Jr.
Prior to Dotson being traded, by
Definitely
the way.
Some solid, not great, but solid weapons for him to work for.
What is
I think
Jahan
that
done
this is
with
going
the
to be an
Eagles, man?
offense that, again, is
Nothing.
going to be able to compete, but is going to be falling to majority of the teams. Even an NFC South team like Tampa Bay, I think I like
122
Tampa
yards.
Bay over them.
12.
The Dallas
12
Cowboys are going to be
receptions
super
in 13
interesting this
games.
year. The Dallas Cowboys, with them simply just losing so much talent, with them losing Tony Pollard in that backfield. That's
The
really gonna be
Cowboys,
the
I don't
huge
know.
hit. We're really going to see where
Looking at
Dak
this right now, I
Prescott
don't know
lies.
why I rated them that high because the running back game was gone.
It's going to have to become pretty much a passing attack now. CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks. Is that even enough? Jake Ferguson.
I don't know what I was thinking with that one.
Solid time last year, and the offensive line is not where it is. They lost Tyron Smith. It was an offensive line that used to be surrounded by 3 or 4 Hall of Famers, and now really the only one left from that is Zach Martin. You have Tyler Guyton at tackle, Terrence Steele at tackle. There's just not a lot
Offensive
more
line
to
was
this
terrible.
offensive line. Still think the defense is going to be amazing. Eric Kendricks in there is going to be great. Obviously, you have guys like DeMarcus Lawrence, Michael Parsons coming in the pass rush. And if Trayvon Diggs can come back healthy, along with Malik Hooker in the secondary, if Diggs can come back healthy and continue to be that ball hawk, I definitely think that helps them. So I think the defense is going to be able to keep them in games. But with the running attack being absolutely non-existent, with the offensive line being weaker, how well is Dak going to react to pressure? Not very well. And I think that while they do have some great regular season success, I think it's going to be a typical Dallas Cowboys season where they end up going out in the first or second round in the playoffs. So sorry, Cowboys fans. No Super Bowl for you guys this year. Possible Super Bowl, however, for the Philadelphia Eagles
Cowboys
at
fans.
15-2.
Maybe next year.
Now, obviously,
next year you guys will go 17-0 and sweep the playoffs.
Another team that has had a couple of blows to them. mainly Jason Kelsey retiring at center. That's going to be huge. It's a big hit to the offensive line. Obviously, you still have
Philly's
William
offensive
Dickerson, Lane
line has held
Johnson,
up this year.
Jordan
I was
Malatala,
super
so there.
surprised about
But
that.
tight end has not been a huge strong shoot for them. Dallas Goedert is a solid tight end. He's not a great one. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, adding Saquon Barkley is going to be huge for them in the running attack. It is going to open up so
It
much
has been great
for
but
Jalen Hurts. It's going to make the passing attack way more unpredictable. Maybe some option play. We see the New York Giants running that, so maybe they adapt that.
and Saquon, obviously.
Defensively,
Eagles had the most talented
made
team
some
on
huge
in the
additions this
league.
year, ones that I'm super excited for. Devin White, one of the quickest linebackers
Yeah,
in
White,
the league today,
DeJean,
upgrading the
Quinyon
secondary.
Mitchell.
Quinyon Mitchell, again, one of the top corners. Personally, not my top corner in the draft, just seeing as he did play at Toledo. He did early predictions.
So
Arizona Cardinals at 4 and
let's move
13
to the West.
in 4th place. Seattle Seahawks in 3rd at
Oof.
6 and 11. The LA Rams
This was
at 8
another
and
big
9
time hit, man.
in 2nd. And the San Francisco 49ers also at 15-2 in 1st place. It's a division that
Oh God.
seems to kind of always
Cardinals
have
and
this
Rams
order.
are
Cardinals
spearheading
always
it.
used to
Seahawks are right
normally
behind
come
there,
in
and then
last.
San Francisco.
You have the Rams and the
It's pretty much
Seahawks kind of
flipped.
battling it out for that 2nd and 3rd spot. And then the Niners in the past couple of years have kind of just dominated this division. So it's going to be very interesting for them. When you look at the Cardinals and their depth chart, obviously the big story is going to be revolved around Marvin Harrison Jr. plugs right into that number 1. But
Who has
they
been
did pick up Zay Jones from the Jacksonville
incredible for
Jaguars. That's
Kyler
going
this
to be
year.
big. James Conner
Kyler,
has been solid at
this
running
is
back.
the most
So, we're
comfortable
gonna
that I've
see
seen
really
Kyler
what
play.
Gooden
his
and
career
Kyler
is
Murray
this
can
year.
really do here. Can Kyler take advantage of finally having
I
a
think he
solid
has.
number 1 option? When you look at the
Although it's
defense,
interesting to
there
see the
are a
two
couple of
Eagles
highlights.
coordinators not having
The
a lot of
secondary is
success
definitely
early
a little
on.
bit improved. You
Both
have
of them
Sean
have been
Murphy
pretty
Buckley,
average.
punting.
Both good in
Buda
and
Baker's
second.
there. Jen Thompson is all right. Pass rush leaves a lot to be desired. Zaven Collins the struggle for them. They have Will
I know I
Hernandez
said
at guard.
through, but
Jonah Williams
what are
has
we getting
been
to? 2
an
hours?
average
Just over the
tackle
2 hour
at
mark?
best. There just hasn't been. There's not a lot to this Arizona Cardinals offensive line, so I think that they're going to struggle there. And overall, I think it's going to be another rebuild year. But hopefully, Kyler and Marvin Harrison go out and start to build a really, really good connection, because that's what you want out of your star quarterback and your number 1 receiver, is just to start to build that connection, so that way when the rest of the offense catches up, they can go ahead and start building this into a top-tier passing offense. Then you have the Seattle Seahawks. We move from having only 1 weapon to having 3. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, JSN, Noah Fant at tight end. While he hasn't had a couple of great years since coming over from Denver, still have a lot of faith that he can go there. Charles Cross, a great left tackle there. Kenneth Walker, the third, solid. I think once again, it comes down to the defense, like Devon Witherspoon. I actually really like Reek Woolen in there. Good duo. Julian Love, solid at safety. But again, pass rush, Nwosu, solid. Jerome Baker, average. Leonard Williams, good pass rusher, but is a little bit past his prime. I'm going to have to see if he can continue to perform at an older age. So it's just going to once again come down
McDonald's
to
been
the defense
able to
here. And when
elevate the
you're
Seahawks
facing,
defense to
once
about
again,
average.
prestigious offenses like the
It's
49ers,
about where
like
they've
the
been.
Rams, if they face off against the Falcons, the defense, in my opinion, is just going to struggle. But the secondary should carry a little bit. Just a little bit more worried about
Skip through this
the
a little bit.
defense. Picked up Jared Verse, somebody who I had them picking up in that draft. They get him at 19. But losing Aaron Donald is obviously going to be a humongous hit.
The Rams are just
Did
such
pick
a
up
lingering
Tre'Davious
team,
White
man.
in the
They're just
secondary.
always
So
like,
I think the
okay.
question for them is
You're
just
never going to have a
somebody that they
Rams
can
team,
find to
at
really
least with Sean
identify
McVay, who's
and bring
really bad.
identity to
They're
that
always gonna
defense.
be
Who is
at
going to be
least
their main
average.
guy? Who is going to be their future Aaron Donald, whether that's true. Solid left tackle, but made some mistakes in the Super Bowl. Is getting up there in age. Cole McKivitz on the outside. Not really sure what to expect out of him, but the offensive attack is still
Suffering a lot because
incredible.
of
Brandon
injuries,
Ayuk going to be looking
unfortunately.
for a new contract. Definitely going to have to see what happens there with that situation. And the defense, I mean, it's star-studded. They picked up Leonard Floyd. Malik Collins in the middle can also still be Javon Hargrave, Nick Bosa. I can keep going, go down the line. Trey Greenlaw, Fred Warner, Devondre Campbell, Charvarius Ward in the secondary. If Hufanga can come back off of that
Defense has been.
with that injury,
Hasn't been
Greenlaw
great.
as well.
So that was the end of it. That was all 5 videos, all 2 hours of my predictions. And overall, not terrible. Not terrible, I have to say. I think some of my biggest blunders, I think that the Denver one was a blunder, but I think that that was not many people had them going 9-8 this year, or we'll see what they go. Potentially the 10th win. I think that the AFC South was solid, not too bad. I think the biggest blunder was likely the AFC East. I got that way mixed up, but again, a lot of unpredictable factors within it. You didn't expect the Jets to just completely blow up. Dolphins dealing with injuries. You had the Bills who just overexceeded expectations. AFC North was pretty on par. I think that I obviously had the Browns way too overrated, the Steelers way too underrated, and I have to stop going against Mike Tomlin, I guess, is my lesson for that today. NFC, Bears definitely overrated, underrated the Vikings. I think once again that's very unpredictable. I think the Bears was definitely a mistake because of how bad their offensive line was. Vikings, I think the offense, you could put anyone behind there under center and they were going to succeed. And I think Darnold has had a pretty solid season. North or the East, apologies. Definitely overrated Cowboys, underrated the Commanders. Shout out to Jane Daniels for the work that he's done. South, pretty consistent. I just think that I didn't consider how bad the Falcons defense really was. And then the NFC West was pretty terrible by me. 49ers, but again, pretty unpredictable factors like injuries. You had the Cardinals being pretty low. So overall, not terrible for my first run at it, but definitely some things that I need to look at and get better at. That's all for me, guys. Let me know what you guys thought about this video. Did you like this type of format of doing different types of reactions? Let me know. Again, apologies for the long video, but I think that it was pretty fun and it was cool to look at how the season started to how things transpired and the state of each team now. It's a much different NFL than what we expected it to be about 4 or 5 months ago. So let me know what you guys think. What were some of your predictions? What predictions did you get right? What predictions did you get wrong? What did you think about my predictions beforehand? Do you think that there were some things that I overlooked, that I underlooked? I think that those are some things that are obvious. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, please feel free to subscribe, leave a like, and comment down below, and share with your friends. And if you haven't already, please feel free to follow us on all social medias, that being TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. All the ads are down below in the description. And of course, like always, there will be that bar popping up right here. And without further ado, guys, that is all from me today. I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.